Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Copyright Office's listening session on AI and music and sound recordings. I'm Andrew Foglia, Deputy Director of Policy and International Affairs. To kick off today's listening session, it is my pleasure to introduce Shira Perlmutter, Register of Copyrights and Director of the U.S. Copyright Office. Shira?
Thank you, Andrew. Welcome to the Copyright Office's public listening session on artificial intelligence, this one focusing on musical works and sound recordings. This is the fourth and final of this series of listening sessions on AI and copyright. While some of today's discussion may overlap with prior listening sessions, we recognize that the music community has unique perspectives, concerns, and use cases. The office appreciates the high level of public engagement with these listening sessions. We've received hundreds of requests to participate, and thousands of people have watched remotely. This interest is, of course, a reflection of the astonishing potential of artificial intelligence and the impact that it's already having in our lives and on society as a whole. So to start off, I can provide a few takeaways from our prior listening sessions. First, there is disagreement about whether or under what circumstances training generative AI on copyrighted works could be considered fair use. Now, of course, since the last listening session, the Supreme Court has issued a new fair use decision in Andy Warhol Foundation versus Goldsmith, which will have to be taken into account in such discussions going forward. Second, there's considerable interest in developing methods to enhance transparency and education with respect to how generative AI produces works, including the possibility of tracking relationships between ingested works and outputs, and also understanding how assistive AI is used as a tool in the creation process. And finally, many stakeholders have questions about the office's registration guidance for works containing AI-generated material, and would like more details and more examples of how the office will approach applications for such works. On this last point, the office will host a public webinar on June 28th, where our registration experts will walk viewers through our registration guidance and answer frequently asked questions. We'll then host a second webinar on July 26th to focus on international perspectives on AI and copyright. And as we've mentioned before, the office will be issuing a notice of inquiry in the coming months, seeking public comments on many of the issues raised during these listening sessions. Now, today's session focuses on musical works and sound recordings. And certainly the music industry has a long history of employing the latest technologies to create new works, from distortion pedals to digital audio workstations to spatial audio and even auto-tune. So there's a lot of interest in how the use of generative AI is similar and how it is different. Before I hand over the virtual mic, let me thank our panelists in advance for contributing to today's conversation. This is a complex and very important topic, and one that has great personal significance for many of our participants. Your perspectives are critical in informing sound public policy, and we look forward to an enlightening discussion. I will now turn things back to Andrew Foglia for more information about today's session.
Thank you, Shira. So as Shira mentioned, today's listening session is the fourth and final in the Copyright Office's series of AI listening sessions. These listening sessions will inform further steps in the office's AI initiative. Questions our panelists raise may be ones in which we seek written comments later this year. For further information about our initiative, to learn about upcoming events or watch past listening sessions, please visit copyright.gov/AI. So today's session will consist of two panels with a brief break in between, and a few Zoom housekeeping points before we begin. First, if you are joining this session but are not a panelist for this particular session, please keep your camera turned off and your mic on mute. Second, we are recording this session today. The recording will be available about 3 weeks after today's session. Third, the transcription function is activated as well. So today's panels will start with a brief introduction and a short statement by each panelist. We request that these statements be limited to 3 minutes. Moderators will be watching the time, and if you go over your allotted time, we will have to cut you off to reserve time for other participants. After these introductions, we will have a moderated listening session. The moderator questions, most of which the panelists have received in advance, are intended only as prompts for discussion, and we welcome participants to share any relevant perspectives and experiences that they feel are important for the office to hear. Panelists who wish to speak should use Zoom's raise hand function, and our moderators will try to call on you in the order in which you raise your hand. I do want to emphasize that this is a listening session and not a debate. There will be other opportunities for participants to engage more directly with competing views and questions from others. Finally, we will not be accepting questions from the audience. If you are in the audience and you want to share a question or comment with the Copyright Office, we will be soliciting written comments through a notice of inquiry later this year. With that, I will hand it over to our moderators for the first session. Jason Sloan is an Assistant General Counsel in our Office of General Counsel. Chris Weston is a Senior Counsel in our Office of Policy and International Affairs. The mic is yours, Jason.
Thanks, Andrew. Welcome, everyone. We'll begin with introductory statements in the order stated on the agenda. As we asked you in advance, as part of your 3-minute statement, please tell us what you think is most important for us to know about the use of generative AI in the music industry. For example, how is it being used? What are the opportunities and challenges, advantages or disadvantages? And what do you foresee to be the near and long-term industry impacts? Let's start with Nathaniel.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Nat Bach, an entertainment litigation partner at Manat Phelps in Los Angeles. And I'm here today representing Music Artists Coalition, or MAC, an organization dedicated to putting artists' rights first. Our membership includes a diverse roster of both contemporary artists and icons like Don Henley, Dave Matthews, Anderson .Paak, Billie Eilish, Diplo, Bonnie Raitt, and Neil Young, to name just a few. Generative AI presents a profound opportunity and challenge for artists in music. On the one hand, musicians have always embraced new technology, but on the other, those advances have been in service of creativity that starts with a human hand and ear. I'd like to make 6 brief observations in my opening remarks. First, human artistry should prevail over machine-based shortcuts every time. The technology we are facing today will change and evolve, but by asking ourselves at key junctures how we can protect human artistic creation and support artists, we can remain on the right path. Second, music is different. It is different than visual arts in its ability to elicit emotions, and the power of a song to tell a story on its own or as part of a film, dramatic work, or television commercial is unparalleled. Music is also different as it relates to how AI models are and can be trained. Unlike the billions of images on which some text-to-image AI platforms are trained, including vast numbers of images in the public domain, the universe of recorded music is smaller and generally accessed via portals and DSPs like YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, and others. Those seeking to train AI models and scrape songs are likely to do so off of these types of services, which also play an important gatekeeping role. Third, the training of AI models on artists' works without a license is infringing and not a fair use. The Supreme Court's decision in Warhol Foundation versus Goldsmith confirms the primacy of artists' songs and recordings where the purpose of the use is similar. And under its reasoning, AI tools that scrape, ingest, or copy such musical works are not transformative. Gen AI companies may use language to suggest transformativeness, but fulsome disclosures will be needed to determine what is actually happening under the hood. Fourth, primarily AI-generated music threatens the already meager royalties that artists can earn via streaming. The larger the slice of the streaming pie that is taken up with AI-created functional music, the less in royalties that DSPs will be required to pay out to human artists and their affiliated licensees. Human artists should be incentivized to create music, but diluting the royalty pools in such fashion would have a significant negative impact. Fifth, copyright is a key pillar of artists' rights and protections and should work in tandem and not at cross purposes with other artists' rights, like the right of publicity and rights under the Lanham Act. MAC supports enactment of a strong federal right of publicity law that will protect persona and identity, but that does not lessen the need for robust copyright protection. Sixth, and finally, we cannot be blinded by the allure of technological advancement without thinking through its ramifications. In the past, lawmakers have failed to protect copyright because they were seduced by changing technology. We should not be misled or confused by those who claim that AI itself is about freedom and creativity and not in service of human creators, especially where profit motives threaten the artists and songwriters on whose backs they may build their businesses. Let's not be fooled again.
Thanks, Nat.
Thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Timothy?
Thank you. My name is Tim Cohan. I'm the Chief Counsel for Peer Music, a global international music publisher. I'd like to thank the Copyright Office for its timely focus on artificial intelligence and for the opportunity to share the perspective of one publisher and the songwriters we represent. When we ask our writers whether they're using AI, they're not sure. Compositional tools that employ AI are already integrated into the creative process. Whether these tools today generate traditional elements of authorship is unclear. What is certain from our point of view is that all of our writers will be using AI in some form before long. We're grateful to the Copyright Office for raising important issues around the use of AI in the creative industries in its March 2023 guidance, which provoked remarkable engagement and discussion in the music community. That said, on close review, we have some concerns about the potential impact on the protection and promotion of creative works if the current guidance were implemented to the letter. As we read the guidance, we must require our writers to specifically identify any AI in delivered works. Some publishers will simply refuse to accept such works. Either way, we risk creating a tripwire to breach of contract that doesn't exist today. A writer may believe the use of AI was de minimis in good faith and fail to disclose, or may be entirely unaware of the use of AI in a song by a co-writer or producer, for example. Moreover, we're not optimistic about getting precise AI metadata when we still struggle to receive songwriter splits, not to mention the essential song metadata that the marketplace desperately needs. The Copyright Office has suggested that in cases of uncertainty, we may register a work with a general statement that it contains AI-generated material. This is helpful. However, under current guidance, we then need to wait for the Copyright Office to contact us to discuss each such work. Unless we're prepared to inspect and analyze every song delivered with AI content, this would appear the only feasible option. As a publisher, we protect our writers' works through timely registrations with the Copyright Office. Works not registered do not receive the full statutory protections of the Copyright Act. Thanks to the modernization efforts of the Copyright Office, this critical process has become more streamlined and efficient. We would hope not to move in the opposite direction with a process that can't be scaled and yet may well become the norm. We would respectfully urge policymakers to afford writers the presumption of authorship in the selection and arrangement of AI material in works submitted for copyright protection. If a question arises as to the enforceability of a particular copyright, then if necessary, a court can conduct the relevant fact-specific inquiry. If that inquiry must instead take place through patent-level scrutiny of every registration at inception, the result may be an effective prohibition on the use of AI in the creative process. We know that prohibitions on the use of technology have not historically turned out well. Putting the question simply, do we want to foster the creative process or fence it in? We would err on the side of creativity and the presumption of protection. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Kenneth?
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Dorshow. I am the Chief Legal Officer of the Recording Industry Association of America. The RIAA's record company members create, manufacture, and distribute sound recordings representing the majority of all lawful consumption of recorded music in the United States, including many of the most popular and commercially valuable sound recordings in the world. The recording industry is and has always been a tech-forward business, ever since the invention of the phonograph through the eras of vinyl, tapes, CDs, and now streaming. Record companies appreciate the valuable role that new technologies, including artificial intelligence, can play in the creative process. Indeed, AI and machine learning is already in use in many facets of music production and distribution. Like every new technology, AI will undoubtedly push creative boundaries and help shape recording artists' visions and expand their commercial reach. We embrace AI's potential as a tool to support human creativity, but not to supplant it. Like any new technology, AI must be used responsibly, ethically, and in a manner consistent with the law. By and large, unfortunately, this is not happening today. Many AI developers, including some of the largest companies in this fast-growing industry, have scraped online music repositories and copied vast troves of copyrighted sound recordings to build data sets for their AI models, and did so and continue to do so without the consent of artists or rights holders. This, in short, is copyright infringement on a massive scale. And the arguments of fair use that we frequently hear as justification for these practices are misplaced, especially in the wake of the Supreme Court's recent Warhol decision, which Shira mentioned in her opening remarks, and I'm sure we'll discuss in greater detail today. We've also seen a proliferation of AI models and services specifically designed to enable the generation of recordings containing digital replicas of well-known artists' voices and styles. In most cases, this is done without the artist's permission to capitalize on the commercial value of the artist's voice, resulting in a distortion of the artist's own vision for themselves, confusion in the marketplace over whether the artist has endorsed this use of their voice, and a dilution of the value of the artist's brand. RIAA's members believe that free market licensing is the right path forward for the use of copyrighted sound recordings by developers of AI systems. We already know that free market licensing of sound recordings works. In fact, it's the foundation of today's thriving streaming economy in which all of the leading services have managed to obtain licenses from our member companies. The necessary licensing markets already exist. They are practical, efficient, and have a track record of success. There is no reason why they cannot work in the new world of AI. I'm honored to be included in this listening session, and I'm grateful to the office for allowing me to participate in today's very important discussion.
Thank you, Ken. Jack.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jack Kugel. I'm a Grammy and Emmy nominated songwriter and producer, and a co-founding board member of Songwriters of North America, where I co-chair the advocacy committee. Songwriters of North America is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 2015 by a group of songwriters, composers, and music industry professionals determined to advocate for ourselves in an increasingly challenging digital economy. SONA has since evolved into a trade association and a hub for thousands of engaged working music creators, representing the boots on the ground songwriters and composers who call making music their job. I'm honored to be a part of today's panel representing SONA. What is most important for the Copyright Office to know about the use of generative AI in the music industry? It is of utmost importance to protect human creators and their rights in the face of developing AI technology. Policymakers must ensure that AI development be done responsibly and in a way that does not threaten the livelihood of human creators, particularly songwriters. Creators must have a say over whether they want their works to be used for AI training. Generative AI often illegally takes copyrighted music written by human creators without permission or compensation. In doing so, it also purposely removes the work's metadata so it can't be tracked. As this technology develops, it could foreseeably generate music that competes in the marketplace with the very human created music it ingested in the first place. Developers will claim that this is a fair use issue. However, fair use was not created to allow the replacement of, nor to compete with human created work in the marketplace. We need the Copyright Office and the courts to recognize that our works must be licensed. Songwriters need to have the choice of whether they want their works to be used by AI companies and the ability and right to say yes or no. How will we know if AI uses our work? We need to have records kept. We need complete record keeping of what is in the database, as well as tracking specific end user queries, i.e. write me a song like Prince. Again, this illustrates the need to retain the ingested work's metadata. Human creators should be able to use AI as a tool, as we have done with many technological developments in music in the past, and have the assurance that our works will be protected by copyright. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Garrett.
Thanks, Jason. And thank you to Register Perlmutter and the entire U.S. Copyright Office team for inviting me to speak at today's listening session and for your steadfast engagement on this important issue. My name is Garrett Levin. I'm the president and CEO of the Digital Media Association, DEMA, the trade association that represents the world's leading audio streaming services. Music has long been at the forefront of potentially disruptive and new technology, and the development of new technology has often been met with initial concern by many in the industry. However, the success of today's streaming-driven music industry is definitive proof that music and technology can, should, and most often do learn to work together and enrich our musical traditions. Emerging technologies have historically improved the creation, distribution, and consumption of music. AI is a rapidly evolving technology with similar abilities to assist creators, including human musicians and songwriters, and improve the way music is created, distributed, and consumed. But AI is not one size fits all. Current discussions around AI often lack grounding definitions, including the lines between generative and assistive AI. The entire industry will benefit from establishing a common set of facts in these discussions, and are focusing questions around specific technologies and uses. Similarly, policymakers benefit from shared substantive expertise about AI technologies, evolving trends, and the potential effects on artistic expression, innovation, and commercial markets before proposing changes. We hope that the office's series of listening sessions reflects the start of that kind of analysis, and DEMA members are willing to assist the government in pursuing that evidence-based path. We'll no doubt dig further into some of the specifics during the discussion today, but at a high level, DEMA members believe the following. Existing US copyright laws, including those governing copyrightability, such as originality, de minimis contribution, son of fair, and the idea expression dichotomy, infringement, including questions of unlawful appropriation, substantial similarity, and causation, and the DMCA, as well as laws that exist outside of copyright to protect one's name, likeness, and the right of publicity, are sufficient to address creations made with or by AI technology. Different legal doctrines can and should be employed to consider the various questions arising from AI-generated music, but copyright law should not be stretched or changed to address questions that more properly arise under laws relating to trademark, right of publicity, or unfair competition. And one final note in this introductory statement on the topic of data, a topic on which DEMA members have extensive experience. Music streaming services should not be and cannot be the arbiters as to what is or is not AI generated. It is not possible with the existing data, and any new data must come from copyright owners and creators. Data accountability must exist throughout the entire chain from creation to distribution. There have long been data challenges in the music space. Tim actually acknowledged these in his opening remarks, including with ensuring that accurate and complete metadata identifiers are included in recordings at the time of distribution. These challenges existed before streaming, continue to exist, and are highly relevant to discussions of the treatment of AI-generated music in streaming. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Garrett. Kevin.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks to the Copyright Office for hosting these listening sessions and allowing me to participate. I'm Kevin Madigan with the Copyright Alliance, and I want to make just a few points in my opening remarks. The first of which is that as we consider questions surrounding copyright infringement and generative AI, it's really important that we separate the discussion of potentially infringing output from infringement that occurs when works are ingested by AI systems without authorization. There have been comments made in some past listening sessions about how infringement isn't really an issue because output of generated AI is so rarely substantially similar to the works that are ingested. But even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that there are unauthorized reproductions occurring at the input or ingestion stage. And the right of reproduction is a standalone right that's implicated. The second point I'll make is that, especially now in the wake of the Supreme Court's Warhol v. Goldsmith decision, it's essential that we recognize that the purpose of many generative AI systems is to use expressive works of authorship to generate new works. And in many cases, that means their purpose is to create works that act as a substitute for the works they ingest. Now, what Warhol v. Goldsmith also makes clear is that transformative use does not control a fair use analysis. And so claims by some AI developers that the transformative nature of AI means that it just automatically qualifies as fair use are clearly not supported by the law. The last point I'll make is that in earlier listening sessions, some argued that there are cases that support the position that AI ingestion of copyrighted works qualifies as fair use, particularly Sega v. Accolade and the Google Books case. I disagree strongly that either of those cases would control an AI fair use analysis because they're clearly distinguishable. As we know, fair use is a very fact-specific analysis, and in the Sega case, which was a reverse engineering case, the court was clear that its analysis was specific to the functional computer-coded issue, whereas AI systems make use of clearly expressive works of authorship. And then in Google Books, the purpose of the scanning was to provide information about the books, not to create new substitutions for the underlying works. So while these cases may be instructive in some ways, they deal in very different fact patterns that are clearly distinguishable from AI ingestion. So I'll stop there for now, and I look forward to the rest of our discussion.
Thank you, Kevin. Alexander.
Hey, Jason. Thanks so much. I'm Alex Mitchell. I'm a musician. I'm a policy advocate for the generative music field, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Boomi. I want to thank the Copyright Office right off the bat for allowing me to participate today and for being open to a variety of viewpoints on these very nuanced issues. Boomi is a free online platform where creators and enthusiasts all over the world are making, sharing, and monetizing generative music every day. More than 1 million Boomi creators have already produced over 15 million original songs using our proprietary technology. And a small percentage of those have been released by our creators through Boomi as a record label and a publisher. We founded Boomi on the principle that every human on the planet should be able to express themselves with music, regardless of their access to resources like expensive studio time, instruments, or even high-end computers. And in pursuit of that human expression, we determined very early on to respect copyright as part of our commitment to ethical AI. So what does ethical AI mean? Well, what it means to us is not creating so-called black box models that are trained using third-party data and are going to be widely discussed today. Instead, we've developed an original generative music framework that is directly inspired, designed and influenced by the musicians who work at Boomi and design our algorithms. Generative music, to me, represents a new creative class of technology-enabled musicians. And this creates an on-ramp for musical expression that we believe will increase the overall interest and participation in the music industry. This is the big opportunity that I think can get lost in some of these conversations. And as a label ourselves, of course, it's our position that the original songs that our creators are making with Boomi should be subject to the same copyright protection as the songs made by generations of algorithmic musicians or generative musicians, whatever term you want to use, that came before us. These protections aren't just important from a business perspective, they're crucial for the prevention of harmful content and the mitigation of unauthorized uses of platforms like ours. So these questions of copyrightability of AI music, which now has a definition that changes almost weekly, are mission critical for us in supporting our rapidly growing community. My hope is that today and in the future that I can be a helpful voice in this conversation from the perspective of a platform that is very much on the front lines of the incredible opportunities and the difficult realities that come with this new generation of technology-empowered human creative expression.
Thanks, Alex. Rohan.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I'm Rohan Paul, an artist and founder of Controlla. Controlla is a platform powered by human singers that helps anyone create, protect, and monetize their AI voice. We're helping major labels and artists pinpoint unauthorized uses of their AI voices on social media to protect some of the world's most beloved singers. 3 months ago, I was engaging with various music tech companies to create a platform where listeners could hear any song in any artist's voice. I believe this platform needed to be done on an opt-in basis, where artists would contribute their songs and voices so that fans can generate AI covers with permission. Instead, they started posting AI covers, but never got permission from artists. They garnered millions of views on social media and started offering direct access to celebrity voices in their apps without getting permission from a single artist. I felt so ashamed. The teams that I trusted in hopes of supporting artists turned around and straight up robbed them. It was at this time various discords were created and a community of AI creators were training models on celebrity voices, making original songs like Heart on My Sleeve. This is no longer bringing attention to the original artists. It's appropriating their voice and brand for clout. After engaging with people in this Discord, it was clear that some of them knew this was wrong, but others didn't believe it was illegal or unethical in any way. They saw it as a form of admiration towards the original artists. They felt like it was their only chance of collaborating with an artist they loved that would otherwise never work with them. Many times they would point to these existing apps and say, if there's an app for it, it must be legal, right? Meanwhile, dozens of companies and apps started stealing these voices and using this new community to kickstart their products and offer easy to use celebrity singing voices without permission. They call them user uploaded voices, but it's obvious that almost every single voice is stolen. These companies didn't create anything. They didn't create the tech, they didn't create the music, and they didn't create the voices that artists spent their entire lives training. It makes no sense why a platform like this should continue to exist and profit off the backs of artists and researchers simply because they lack the decency to ask for permission. I believe that every single one of these platforms needs to have all unauthorized voice models removed immediately, as they already contribute to millions of AI songs each week. Despite these voice stealing platforms, I do believe AI voices and other AI music tools have tons of value to offer artists, fans, and all players in the industry. We just need more clarity on what isn't allowed and how artists who want to embrace it should be compensated from derivative works in their voice. Artists should have control of their own voices, and those that want to embrace opening it up access to fans should be able to do so on their own terms. My proposed solution would be to explicitly include protection of someone's voice, whether real or AI, under copyright law. Furthermore, I'd advocate that any past contracts that give catalog owners permission to use recordings in any way should not extend to the cloning of a voice or style with AI. We're at the point where AI voices are indistinguishable from the real thing, even by AI. So we can't compare this to sampling or training systems on other forms of media like text and images, because our voice is as unique as a fingerprint and it should be treated as part of our identity. Thanks.
Thank you. Jason.
Hi, my name is Jason Riss. I'm the co-owner, CTO, and EVP of Wixen Music Publishing. We're a music publishing administration company that represents many of the finest songwriters and songs of the last 100 years, from rock bands like Tom Petty, The Doors, Weezer, Rage Against the Machine, to hip hop icons like Missy Elliott, and even to old standards like Santa Claus is Coming to Town. First, let me start by thanking the office for getting ahead of this issue with these roundtable discussions and with the recent registration guidance on the human authorship requirements. AI is quickly becoming a disruptive technology in the music space, and the office's proactive approach is both necessary and appreciated. There are a few important topics that I hope we can tackle here today. First is the issue of rampant unlicensed use of copyrighted songs in training data in AI models. Songs and recordings are being used without permission and without compensation to the songwriters and artists who created them. This is not fair use. It is large-scale copyright infringement. As several panelists have already mentioned, the Supreme Court's decision in the Warhol case clearly supports this view. This must be stopped. Music used in AI training must be properly licensed in a free market, which includes the right to opt out of licensing if one so chooses. Second is preserving a functional and flourishing ecosystem for songwriters and artists. The near-term impacts of generative AI are already being felt by music companies which create and license mostly generic background music for brands, TV, and film. And this replacement is a bottom-up process. It'll start with the generic background music, but make no mistake, it will improve rapidly and it will start to compete with and displace popular performers and songwriters. Finally, not everything is doom and gloom. There are many positive and mutually beneficial opportunities ahead for human writers and artists, as well as the AI companies, such as human-machine ideation, collaboration, and advanced tooling assisting the songwriting and recording processes. There are also licensing opportunities for copyrighted songs or vocal recordings to be used as training data if one so chooses. While we embrace the technological change that generative AI brings, we must not lose sight of the humans, past, present, and future, who have and who will contribute human authorship to music. We must ensure that they may continue to earn an honest living from their work, creativity, and talent without having the fruits of their labor stolen wholesale, chopped up, and regurgitated through an AI model without consent, compensation, or attribution. The human authorship requirement isn't just a key component of copyright law, it's a key component to actual creativity, innovation, and preserving the long march of the progress of the useful arts for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kathleen.
Thank you. Thank you to the U.S. Copyright Office for convening these sessions and the chance to participate today. My name is Kathleen Strauss. I'm the Senior Vice President of Operations for Sound Exchange. Sound Exchange is the premier music tech organization independently formed in 2003 to build a fairer, simpler, and more efficient music industry through technology, data, and advocacy. Representing the entire recorded music industry, Sound Exchange closely monitors, assesses, and advises on the legal, political, and business impacts to the industry of emerging technology. Sound Exchange was created for the streaming era, and we have distributed over $10 billion on behalf of more than 650,000 music creators to date. We continue to embrace cutting-edge solutions, and through real-time data management, we process billions of performances each month and are constantly honing our best-in-class patented matching technology. We process and pay out 90% of royalties within 45 days of receipt. While our matching technology is pivotal to that, working with DSPs, streamlining reporting data, and sourcing data from copyright owners are cornerstones to these accurate and timely payments. A globally recognized leader in the music industry, SoundExchange continues to develop and influence worldwide data and technology standards to ensure accuracy and efficiency through a continually evolving digital ecosystem. Through the use of data, SoundExchange is making it easier for digital service providers to fulfill their obligations to pay creators fully and fairly for their work. We pay out monthly, operating with one of the lowest overall administration rates in the industry. At SoundExchange, our mission is to power the future of music. And for music to have a future, it must be fair to the creators who drive it. As one of the founding members of the Human Artistry Campaign, we believe that creators must be at the center of the conversation, and that AI tools should be operationalized in a way that protects artists and the value of music. The music industry is poised to transform once again, and we must anticipate the challenges ahead, both immediate and long term, so we can maximize opportunities for creators and enact guidelines for responsible use of artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for those introductions. To begin the discussion, I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Chris.
Thank you, Jason. So the Copyright Office is interested in learning more about how creators are using and plan to use generative AI in the creation of musical works and sound recordings. So I would like the panelists to expand on this, and in responding specifically, can you please discuss your views on whether there are situations where generative AI is used as a tool as part of a larger creative process that is driven and controlled by a human being? So if you could use the raise hands feature, and I will call on the first person. Alex.
Thanks so much, Chris. Absolutely, generative AI isn't just being used now. I mean, this is not a new thing. Has been used, like I said, for generations. I think the term generative music actually comes from the activities of the artist Brian Eno, Robert Fripp, Radiohead, Aphex Twin, many examples of artists who have used different types of algorithms in their creative process, and to take some of these new methodologies and apply them to that creative process. It seems like musicians making music. And I think that's an important filter to apply when people are talking about this stuff. Is this, some sort of AI robot, as it is sometimes discussed, or is this just musicians doing what musicians have always done? I'll give you a specific example from Boomi, where we are really looking at this from the copyrightability perspective on different activities that people might take or might engage in when they use our platform. So for example, on Boomi, you can generate a song, edit that song, rewrite that song, add your voice to that song, spend hours and hours editing and changing that song. In our view, that would be clearly quite a bit of human effort that goes into the creation of a song that might be described as generative or might be described as AI generated, but is certainly coming from an artist. There's another set of activities that could be called curation, where you've determined, a human has used their creativity to determine a set of inputs and then have run that algorithm over and over and over again until the sort of algorithmic system can create something that they want. So those are two types of human labor, two types of work that's going into the creation of the ultimate song, notwithstanding everything that our musicians have done to create these algorithms. And so that's just one example of an area where you have a new artist or a new musician maybe creating music for the first time and doing something that is fundamentally a musician making music. So I would say that, at least the way we look at it, and at least the way we've designed our generative AI systems, of course it is part of a larger creative process, and of course that's completely controlled by a human being.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Kevin.
Yeah, I'll just sort of piggyback on some things Alex said and also that Shira said in her opening remarks, and that is that, music creation is an area of the arts where AI technologies have been used for years and are currently used to produce works, and musicians and music producers use them as a tool for, a larger creative process. If you think of things like a beat generator or even like auto-tune vocal tools, these have been used for years. And while they may utilize AI technology, they aren't models that ingest massive amounts of created, copyrighted, protected works. And that's an important distinction that we should make. So whereas many AI technologies are used as part of a greater creative process, there are different AI platforms that may be ingesting full songs or sound recordings for the purpose of creating new musical works or sound recordings. And in that scenario, the person, sort of prompting the system to generate a song may not be a musician or songwriter, and they may not be really exerting any creative control over the generation of the new works. And then that new work might actually act as a substitute for the songs ingested. So, I guess just sort of follow up on something I said in my opening remarks. I think it's important to recognize when generative AI technologies have sort of a substitutional purpose rather than when they're a creator uses it as a tool to sort of supplement an already existing work, or the creator manipulates a tool the tool in a sufficient way.
Thanks. Jack is next.
Sorry, I was muted there. I was going to say, at this point, most generative AI tools for songwriters appear to be in their infancy, at least in my experience. Songwriters are not quite yet putting in a prompt and receiving a fully baked composition, but we do know that its widespread use is just around the corner. Anecdotally, we've heard that generative AI is mostly being used for ideation at this stage, but there is concern among songwriters about AI being used, particularly where you don't have a guarantee that the AI you're using doesn't infringe on someone else's work or isn't stealing from human creators.
Thank you. So does anybody else have any responses? Nathaniel.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, just a few other thoughts. I think, again, we're at the infancy of this. And so this is going to continue to roll out, and it's going to be a continued conversation. Pro Tools, Ableton, GarageBand, we will get to the point, presumably, at which AI processes will be so folded into the standard suite of products available to songwriters and producers that they may not even know what is necessarily happening when they press that button. It will just become de rigueur. And so having an understanding along the lines of what Kevin said as to what is feeding into that process on the back end, where the technology, where the learning, where the magic is coming from, and whether that's trained off of copyrighted works without a license is really where the rubber meets the road. Because at some point, it's just going to become part of our Microsoft Word, part of our suite of products that are in front of us every day.
Okay, thanks. Rohan.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch upon a couple tools as an artist. I think there's a lot of AI tools that help with different steps in the process, which used to be quite complicated for people. And I think that helps democratize creation and is a net positive as long as they're sourced ethically. So these are tools that could help you compose songs or design samples for your songs, write lyrics to your song, and even just master your song. I think a lot of these tools open up new ways for people to create music where they would normally otherwise struggle. But I think when we talk about like Music LM, which is like this new model Google released, I can totally see people in the future trying to train a model on a specific artist's catalog. And I don't see a world where it makes sense for that person to end up having 1 million songs in this artist style that they can own and monetize, while the artist only has their original 10 songs that they created. So I think it's important for catalogs that more than just mass trained catalogs that are specifically trained for a model should be owned by the creator rather than whoever decided to take them and train that model.
Okay, thanks. We've got a few minutes left with this particular topic. If anyone else has any thoughts. If not, we could go to the next topic, and I will ask Jason to ask the next question.
Thanks, Chris. So we've heard how certain AI models, generally for text and images, are trained, and the concerns that creators and copywriters have with models that use their copyrighted works without permission as part of the training process. And we heard the similar concerns from several of you all during your introductory remarks. When it comes to musical works and sound recordings, what's your understanding of how current and emerging generative AI models are being built? For example, are they similarly trained on pre-existing musical works and sound recordings, or are there other methods, such as applying musicological rules? Are there any technological distinctions between AI training of musical works and sound recordings as compared to other types of works, like text and images. Jason.
Yeah, sure. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. There are a couple different types of training processes that the AI companies are using. Some are using musicological rules, and as a publishing administrator, zero problem with that. Great, love it. I support the democratization of access to music in that fashion. I think where it breaks down is there are a number of companies that are taking in copyrighted music through illegally gotten ways, scraping the web, or whatever data set that some researcher has collected. And they're taking this copyrighted music and they're feeding it into their algorithms. And out the other end, they're producing things that are derivative works based on those copyrighted original songs. So I think there's two buckets to consider, and they have different ramifications from a copyright perspective.
Thank you. Tim.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that there's a lot of focus on lyrics. And so really the language models must intake those lyrics. They must take copyrighted lyrics in. So that's not a case where you can ask the question as to whether or not you've just applied musicological rules to it. You do need to intake those lyrics wholesale.
Thank you. Rohan.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch upon specifically AI singing voices for this and how they're trained. When they're trained on celebrity models, a lot of times they will take existing songs on YouTube and use stem splitters to get just the vocals. And then they'll train a bunch of those vocals so that they can recreate the timbre of that voice. And in this case, what the technology does at its core is it's taking one single vocal performance and it's converting the timbre into someone else's voice. So when people do that, it's both using that original recording, that reference audio, and it's cloning that other person's voice. And I think it's kind of irrelevant how much data they use to clone someone's voice. I think if they can clone a singer's voice in an indistinguishable way, that singer should own it, regardless of who owns the catalog of music that it was trained on.
Thank you. Ken.
So I'm just going to echo some of the points that have already been made here. There are obviously different types of technologies in use here. Distinguishing the sound recording piece from the musical work and lyrics piece just for a second, there's a professed desire by some of these AI companies very openly that they are seeking, when they're trying to output audio, they want to capture the subtle timbres and dynamics and expressivity of actual audio. There are some systems that will ingest and output MIDI files, but then to get this more rich output, they have to ingest raw audio. And again, not to beat a dead horse, this is a theme I think in a lot of the comments here, that those audio inputs have to be licensed. You can't just simply take them to make this more expressive output. And that's the fundamental problem that we're seeing with all of this. And sort of to echo the points that Rohan made, with the vocal cloning in particular, we're seeing the proliferation of stem extraction, vocal stem extraction from copyrighted sound recordings. Those stems are themselves copyrighted material, and you can't just take it without authorization. So this is a problem we're seeing across the board. There's name, image, and likeness and right of publicity issues with all of that too, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail, but particularly with respect to the ingestion of inputs for this kind of technology, it just seems nakedly misappropriative to take this without permission.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add? Nat.
Yeah, to build on what Ken was saying, I think whenever there's transformational technology and a shift in the landscape, we kind of enter the land grab phase where, obtaining market share is extraordinarily important. And we've seen this previously with respect to self-driving cars, delivery services, whatever it might be, the Ubers, the taxis, et cetera. And then the profit and sustainable model sort of comes second after they've captured customer base. And I think we're still in that phase. And so setting the ground rules while we're in that phase and having an understanding is critical to protect artists. And again, there's nothing preventing companies who are actually scraping, using inputs and ingesting copyrighted works, songs, or recordings from going out and getting licenses. And in fact, we're hearing today from folks like Rohan and others, they're saying, we want artist consents in order to build our business, in order to make it sustainable and scalable long-term. And so the question then becomes, well, why couldn't that, and why isn't that the default across the industry as a whole? And it should be. And in fact, Warhol speaks to that, right? The Supreme Court's decision in Warhol speaks to that just a few days ago, in which you're talking about the same purpose. You could have two different uses, two different companies, one giving a license, one trying to rely on a fair use defense. And I think that opinion points up exactly the concerns that are being articulated today and why a license is necessary in that circumstance. And I think Justice Sotomayor said something to the effect of, why not pay, why didn't you simply pay Goldsmith a few bucks for a license or whatever it would have cost at the time? That really resonates with me and with Mac here when we're talking about what these companies should be doing as a baseline.
Thank you. Alex, if I may, I want to ask you a specific question based on something you said in your opening remarks. You had made reference to, I believe you called an original AI framework, suggesting it was somehow maybe different from some of the other things being discussed. And I wanted to see if you could elaborate on what you meant by that.
It's been a very common question these days, particularly in conversations like this. And I've got a lot of different ways of explaining this, and none of them are great. The best way I would describe it, and we've heard some other support for musicological rules-based composition, which again I cannot reiterate enough, has a very long history and a very long history of copyrightability. I think that when it comes to our approach, we are taking those. There are a lot of different ways to solve a statistics problem. And as a musician, it kind of pains me to describe the creation of a musical work as a statistics problem, but that is a helpful way of understanding some of the different methodologies that can be applied to generating music. You can solve a statistics problem by creating a gigantic black box model. You can also solve a statistics problem by hand. You can also understand the relationships between notes on a musical level, create algorithms that will take in those rules and those relationships and generate an output that in our experience very much needs human intervention and benefits from human intervention in order to sound great and sound awesome. Certainly within the millions of songs getting created on Boomi, the best that we've heard and the things that we are pulling out and supporting as a label and publisher in the most traditional sense, of course, tend to be the songs with the most human intervention and the most sort of, let's call it, a vocal quality, the artistry, the human artistry that gets applied. And to answer the broader question, we pay very close attention, and we've been in this market for several years, to advances in methodologies that that obviously we've seen, right, with LLMs, with things like Stable Diffusion, and there has been a discussion here of market forces. Clearly, there is now there's also been a discussion of companies who have jumped into the market, maybe without licensing in other domains, not largely music, but in other domains. Whatever we want to say, there is now a market expectation for prompts, for using musical influences and using natural language to create music. And so for us, we have been very active in doing everything we can to try to obtain some licenses to be able to answer that market demand for prompts. And I think we'll probably spend more time discussing licenses inside of this, but for now, what I would say is, as one of the leading platforms in this space, we have, wanted to respect copyright. We've always respected copyright. We've answered these statistics problems by hand so far. We would love to work with rights holders and obtain licenses to answer the market demand for prompts and continue to build what we see as a human created work. I have more thoughts on that, but we'll probably save them for the later questions.
Great, thank you. So several of you mentioned this in your introductions, but would anyone like to elaborate on these the concerns that creators and copyright owners have with various training approaches with respect to using pre-existing copyrighted musical works and sound recordings as part of the training model? Sorry, Jack.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, a few things. I mean, songwriters in general were extremely concerned about AI developers using our music and works to train AI for a number of reasons. Individual creators have no negotiating power with AI systems developers, some of them being the biggest companies in the world. And because of that, we're kind of at significant risk of being harmed economically by unauthorized use of our works for training and ingestion purposes. When folks talk about the sound recording being ingested, we've got to remember there's an underlying composition, an underlying work that also needs to be licensed. It's not just teaching someone how to sing like Frank Sinatra because they're licensed the master recording. You can't have a master recording without an underlying composition. And I think that's something that needs to be remembered and is not always remembered. AI developers using copyrighted music to train precisely, they're using it to train precisely because it does have value. And the fact they're using it at all shows that our works should be compensated accordingly. Unauthorized AI training run the risks of cannibalizing the marketplace, stealing, ingesting copyrighted works, and then outputting works based on those. They compete with the work made by humans. And we're going to be at a point in the not too distant future where they'll be able to do it cheaper and faster. There you go.
Thanks, Jack. Kathleen.
So to reiterate what I think other people have said today, as a general principle, all copyright creators and owners have the right to determine how their works are used. But for this right to be meaningful, the ability to track how copyright works are used in AI training sets is critical. This data includes identifying not only the input works themselves, but their owners, their creative participants, so that proper licensing around that use can occur.
Thank you. Kevin.
Yeah, I'll just be brief because I think others have made these points, but I just would say absolutely creators and copyright owners are concerned, if an AI system is ingesting and engaging and wholesale copying of sound recordings, particularly if the purpose is to generate a new work that will potentially act as a market substitute for the work that the system trains on. And if you just sort of think about it from the perspective of a musician or songwriter, their works are potentially being used without their permission to fuel a technology that generates something that may replace them. And they have no control or say over whether their works are used, and they receive no compensation. So it just seems highly inequitable and could really ultimately be very damaging to the incentives to create that drive our creative ecosystem.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, I'll just add that it's encouraging to hear from some of the AI companies on this panel that they do respect copyright and are entertaining licensing. And I think that's ultimately where at least I want to get to. But it's not what we're seeing on the ground today. Our company has maybe 5% of the US publishing market of popular songs, and has had 0 AI companies approach us about licensing. And we know our songs are being used in training sets and data. So, the talk isn't matching the action, and there's other certain AI companies that are going around to judiciary committees and saying, yes, we love music and we respect artists. But when you reach out to them, they're like, yeah, we look forward to discussing this with you in court over a fair use defense. And it's like, I think we should just figure out a way to come together, get a licensing framework in place, allow creators, rights holders to decide to license their works for training or decide not to. and let the free market figure it out. But we're not there yet.
So is there any licensing activity happening in this area currently? And is there a general willingness on the part of creators and copyright owners to license their works for AI training? Nat.
Yes, so I had to raise my hand for the prior question. So let me just amplify that very briefly, Jason, and then others who are more familiar with the licensing current regime can speak to that. So again, I'll just amplify what others have said and add a few other points. I don't think the concern about ingestion and training on copyrighted works can be overstated, right? It is existential, and we've been hearing it from folks across the spectrum here today. And frankly, I think what we're all struggling with on some level is the number of unknowns, right? We hear from, and I'm not necessarily singling out those involved in the tech companies here today, we hear it often. There are individuals who are creating technologies, they can't explain it to the public. They're going to have a hard time explaining it to artists, and to have transparency into what is happening so that we don't have to dig in the course of lawsuits and litigation and discovery to find out where the rubber meets the road. And I say that sort of against my self-interest as a litigator. I mean, all parties should be incentivized, including the platforms who are seeking such works and using them to explain what is going on. And the more there is a disclosure and a fulsome understanding about technologies, whether it's diffusion, whether it's something else, the more there can be common ground around this. And I think there's too many unknowns, too many vertical silos, and folks need to have that conversation centrally.
Thank you, Alex.
Just to piggyback, I couldn't agree more on there being an incredible number of unknowns. And to bring it back to what I think is the central, some of the central questions, right, that are being asked of the Copyright Office. I don't think you can separate the unknown of copyrightability from some of the unknowns around licensing. There's been a lot of discussion about licensing. I have to keep our conversations specifically with rights holders private, but of course, this is something that we've engaged in. Of course, we want to meet the market, provide prompts, provide a really cool experience for our users. And look, when you ask people what they want to prompt, they are inspired by their favorite artists, and that's difficult, not impossible, but very difficult to answer if you're not using a methodology that ingests copyright training data. Great, so let's go get a license, right? Now, if we're going to get a license and create commercial terms around this stuff, right, then we need to have an understanding of, well, how much should we pay? Because how much can we make, right? Of course, we are, actively monetizing copyrights, today as a label. But if there were, for example, a rule that said, if a work that's produced by a model that used copyrighted training data, right, like the models we're talking about today, did not have any copyrightability associated with it, right? Or let's just say in some of these conversations, it's public domain, right? Well, how do you monetize that? What's the right and also how do you prevent abuse, or how do you sort of police the usage of a system like that if you don't have DMCA, or if you don't have other sort of copyright protections on that work? How would you prevent a different AI company from producing a whole bunch of stuff and training a different model on the outputs of your model, which might violate your license? So there are a lot of unknowns. I don't think they're unsolvable, but the sooner we get to more solid answers and solid guidance on what these systems, if what these systems produce, depending on how the system is created, what the copyrightability standards are for that, I think the licensing conversation is going to move slowly because both sides, right, and neither side has a full understanding of what the commercial potential would look like if those works do enjoy copyright. Then I think we all understand how to monetize copyrights. That's
Thanks, Alex.
What everybody here does.
Thanks, Alex. Ken.
Yeah, I just want to go back briefly and echo the comments that Nathaniel and others have made about the importance of licensing the input for so-called training of these AI systems, and specifically to talk about the Warhol case, because again, there's as others have mentioned, there's this debate going on whether it's fair use or it's not fair use. In our view, it's always been clear that when you're talking about ingestion of copyrighted material for the purpose of training a system to output material that will compete in the marketplace with the very material that was used to train the system in the first place, that is purely substitutional. It is not fair use. We've always thought that that was clear. In the wake of the Warhol decision, candidly, I think it's a cynical argument at this point to say that it's fair use. It couldn't be clearer given the specific purpose to which this is being put. Now, as for your question, Jason, about whether licensing activity is happening in this area, the short answer is yes. Our member companies have made it very clear that they are open for business to discuss licenses for their catalogs for use by legitimate AI businesses. There have been public announcements in recent weeks about certain deals that colleagues on the next panel can probably speak to more authoritatively than I can. But the deals are being discussed and they are happening as it should be. Every licensing agreement obviously is going to be bespoke and it will be dependent on the use case at issue. But as the streaming market, as I said in my opening remarks, as the streaming market has already made clear, free market licensing of sound recordings in the context of new technology is readily achievable. It's nothing new. There's no reason for any AI company at this point to proceed without licenses for use of copyrighted sound recordings for training of their AI systems, and they act at their peril if they choose to do so.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks. As to the question of licensing, I think it's clear among publishers, many of us, that we certainly are willing to engage in discussions about licensing for generative AI. We've licensed AI training in the past, years ago, non-generative, but for development of clearly AI tools. And I think I'd echo what Ken says, that it's possible to license. It's possible to license in the market, right? I think I saw some in the transcript of one of the Hill discussions, one of the speakers simply saying that, oh, this would be impossible. How would you possibly get licenses from everyone, that all the content owners that you need? And it's been done in the past. It's been done many, many times. It's feasible. We did it with YouTube. We did it with TikTok. Our lyrics are licensed independently in many different ways. So we would be willing to talk about it. But I think there are a lot of unknowns, as everyone has said, and we need to know how the licenses would be structured, what safeguards and limitations would be in place, how ownership would be attributed to the output. And I think I think that Alex's point is really well taken, that we need to have a little more certainty as to what the commercial value is of these licenses. And again, if the aim is simply going to be, from a copyright perspective, to try to identify and ferret out what's AI and make sure that doesn't get monetized in the product of these processes, then I think we're going to lose a lot of value and works that I think we all agree should be copyrightable and should be protected and should be out in the marketplace.
Thank you. I see Kevin and Rohan both their hands up. We are running a little behind. I'll let you both respond, but please do so quickly. Kevin first, please.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I can't speak about the specific licensing deals, but I will just say that I heard arguments in earlier sessions that it's just too hard or too impractical to license in the AI space, and so we shouldn't even try. I obviously disagree strongly with that position, and I would point out that there are copyright owners who are already offering licenses for use of massive amount of works, and when developers use works without a license, they destroy the market for licensing. And I would just add that simply because a license for a certain type of use is not yet available or is in development doesn't mean that those works can be used without permission. And I just think back to a good example of photocopying in the about 30 years ago, around the time of the Texaco case in the early 90s. At that time, with that case, licensing for photocopy was just being developed, but it's now a robust market. So we shouldn't see the lack of a completely developed licensing system as justification for why there shouldn't be one.
Thank you. And Rohan, briefly, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think there's definitely licensing going on. People are very open to it. The important thing is that the companies are approaching it with the sense of how are we supporting artists in a sustainable way, rather than how are we taking more money from that pie. And as long as there's a business model that supports that, it's actually very easy to license lots of musical works.
Thank you. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks. So I want to ask a question about what's being done with AI outputs. What effect is the production and distribution of AI-generated music having or expected to have on streaming, including from the perspectives of the digital services, their users, copyright owners, and creators, as well as AI companies? Garrett.
Hi, thanks. I want to touch on a couple of things on this topic. First is something I mentioned in my introductory statement, which is the data challenges. I think there has been a lot of discussion in conversations around AI about ensuring that generative AI materials are identified as such. And as I said in my introductory statement, music streaming services should not be and cannot be the arbiters of that. The data challenges that exist in the music industry are well known and well documented. They stem from well before the time of streaming. They will continue. We are working hard collectively as an industry to solve for them, but throwing in the additional challenge of identifying what is and is not AI generated adds additional hurdles to that process. Second, I want to touch on value a little bit because that's something that I think comes up in a lot of these conversations. There are broader conversations within the music industry going on right now about the relative value of various works. This is not limited to conversations about generative AI. It covers all kinds of different audio that is made available on streaming platforms and is subject to a lot of ongoing commercial conversations. And it impacts something that is relevant to the third topic, which is how consumers play into this. Ultimately, consumers should not be restricted in the music that they consume, subject to applicable laws, regardless of whether AI was involved in the creation of such works or not. The consumer is, at the end of the day, the ultimate arbiter of the value of a given work. They'll choose whether they want to listen or not based on whether they enjoy that or not and whether they prefer continue to consume it. And finally, I want to, being mindful that others are going to have a lot to say about these various topics, also urge a note of caution that as we have these conversations, that we don't automatically always jump to issue X is an AI-driven issue. This is relevant to the value question. It's also relevant to things that we've seen reported in the press or instances where, for example, there was news about a particular service removing a selection of works that had come from originally an AI-generated platform, but it turned out that that had nothing to do with whether those works were AI-generated or not, and everything to do with an entirely separate yet overlapping issue of ongoing challenges around stream manipulation. And so not everything today in the music industry is an AI problem, and not everything is solvable by saying, well, let's throw more rules around what the services can and cannot do because AI. And I'll stop there because I'm sure others have things to say about this, but this is obviously a topic that covers a lot of ground for DEMA's members.
Thank you. We've got a lineup of Alex, then Ken, then Nat, then Jason, but I'm going to exercise my moderator's privilege and ask Kathleen if she has any response to this particular topic. I just want to make sure everyone gets a chance to talk.
So the music industry has a history of working with stakeholders to develop solutions for copyright owners and artists. There's no reason to think that that history will not be able to continue into the future. The most important thing is for creators, they deserve fairness and control over their AI use. And we agree with the Human Artistry Campaign that the use of copyrighted works and use of voice and likeness and professional performers requires authorization, licensing, and compliance of all relevant state and federal laws. This is an example where the ability to track and identify AI is critical. There's been a lot of talk about data on both sides. I don't think we can ignore the importance of data in this conversation.
Thank you, Alex.
Sure, and you know, to echo some of the points that Garrett made, which I think were very well founded. The impact on streaming. Streaming is a function of the music in the market, and I think the main effect of AI tools and AI systems is going to be additional participation by, like I keep ranting about, a new creative class, a technology-enabled creative class. It will accelerate a trend of additional participation by more artists that will probably have effects on market share. But there are concerning ideas to me as an artist being thrown around about an idea, for example, that you would pay a musician differently or less depending on the generative methodology used in the creation of the work. I don't want to keep this short, or even excluding those musicians entirely from the market. And that should give anyone who cares about creative music, creative art, real pause. There's always been pushback from incumbents on every major creative leap in music throughout history. Imagine a rule that said, well, if you use autotune, you get paid 25% less than somebody who didn't use autotune. The idea that you would pay musicians differently because of how they're creating their music has no precedent that I'm aware of, and it's something that should be taken very, very seriously. And of course, it's easy to paint AI as bad, and that's going to be a popular thing to do for a while. And that's why I think it's so important that we continue to advocate for this new creative class.
Thanks, Ken.
If I can just briefly, I'm going to take the other side of the coin that Alex and Garrett are minting about the consumer experience, which of course is paramount for all of us. What we're seeing in practice with the proliferation of this AI generated output is the introduction of a lot of, the scale of production is obviously, infinitely greater than humans are capable of. So what we're seeing is the introduction of low quality machine generated music on these digital services that make it harder for fans to find their favorite artists. It has little appeal to the subscribers, and it diverts the flow of royalties away from human creators. So, we can have this conversation, but we have to be mindful of what the effect is on human creativity, which I think, as a lot of us are in agreement on, is really paramount consideration.
Thank you. Nat is next.
Yeah, to build off of Ken, and I think we're coming from the same perspective on this question. As I said as I raised in my opening statement, there's a serious concern that the streaming royalty pie is going to be diluted by AI created music, and there will simply be less to go around unless that companies are required to pay out to human creators and those that have licensed their music. And a couple of points in response to Garrett, and I take them as well crafted. The question about whether platforms have to be the arbiter of what is AI generated or not. And I think we're sort of focused a little bit, maybe mentally at this point, about the one-off, the whack-a-mole phenomenon of someone coming up with an AI generated song. Who knows where it came from? They have no particular identity or affiliation. I think we're soon going to be in a position where it's not going to be a mystery. There's going to be whole libraries of AI created works that are going to be sought to be licensed or partnered with platforms. Alex's comments about what Boomy's doing, for example, with respect to their record label and understanding the copyrightability of their own music that they're creating using the technology, leads in that direction as well. So pretty soon, I don't think we're going to be in the mystery. We have to throw our hands up and, what can we do about this? There's going to be clear markers and definitions around what is coming from sources that are created using similar types of technology. And maybe there'll be reps and warranties and other things that others will have to, should be required to use when uploading music. And then on the separate point about whether consumers are the ultimate decision makers about what they're going to listen to and the arbiters, I think this is an important point. As Ken mentioned, playlisting, DJs, and others who are feeding to consumers in the first instance what individuals or what companies are promoting and pushing will mean that to the extent that there's an incentive to promote AI created music that would pay out to others than human creators, that raises a serious concern. and finding the songs that are created by humans and the number of plays that those get based on algorithmic recommendations is a serious concern in that regard as well.
Thank you, Nat. Jason.
Yeah, a bit duplicative here, but just want to echo concerns about dilution. We're already seeing a huge amount of dilution, even with human-made tracks. There's been so many advances in democratizing recording technology. I forget what the number is today, but 100,000 new tracks are getting uploaded every day. What does that look like at 10x or 100x scale? How do you cut through the noise? I think that's going to be a real problem, and it's going to harm human creators because they're just going to be overrun by generative music. That's one issue. And the other issue is it sort of creates a weird perverse incentive for streaming companies, perhaps. If they can steer their playlist and their algorithms towards stuff that maybe pays out at a lower rate or pays out at a zero rate because they bought the rights, even if the rights are copyrightable in the first place, which is, still kind of an open question. They have a financial incentive to steer listeners towards, those kinds of songs and away from human created songs.
Thank you. And Garrett will be the last person for this question, and then we'll move on.
Thank you for the opportunity. And I know we're not in a debate, and so I'm not intending to turn it into a debate. I think there's just two things that I do want to say in relation to the issues that have been raised here. The first is that, at the end of the day, streaming services have the incentive to provide a compelling product to consumers that they actually continue to subscribe to. And what that looks like, I think, is ultimately an ongoing iterative process. And the second thing that I will say is that I don't think that we are ever going to be in a situation in which it is a binary question about easily identifiable AI versus not. I mean, we have heard, in fact, from rights holder representatives on this call about the ways in which rights holders are themselves seeing their own creators either use AI tools or partner with AI generative creators and creative platforms to develop things. And so I don't think that we are in a scenario where we will ever be in a scenario where it can simply be an on-off switch between treat AI stuff way X and treat non-AI stuff way Y. And that is part of the challenge of the ongoing conversations here.
Thank you. And for the next question, I'm going to hand it back to Jason.
Thanks, Chris. And I'm sure all of you see we are running a little bit short on time. So please try to keep your answers concise so we can get through the next few questions. So as several of you noted in your statements, there are songs being released into the market, both cover songs and new compositions being sung by AI generated voices that sound like famous performers. What are your views on the use of generative AI to imitate or simulate the voice of a particular recording artist for use in new recordings, including whether there are any particular copyright implications? Rohan.
Yeah, so I touched upon this a little before, but I definitely believe that all artists should own their own voice. And from my understanding of current copyright law, this is the case because fair use says if a copyrighted piece of work if the heart of the original work is used in a derivative, then that's not fair use. And I would argue that a singer's voice is the heart of their work. I think we also just have to acknowledge that AI is recreating their voice indistinguishably. So it should be their voice. They should be in control of it. And it's not the same as sampling or stealing a song. It's taking someone's identity.
Thank you, Ken.
I just echo what Rohan just said. The problem that we see with these voice cloning AI models is it's just theft of an artist's voice. There's a lot of different laws that are implicated here. There are some non-copyright laws that were mentioned earlier. There's the Section 43A of the Lanham Act. There's state right of publicity laws. These are, of course, not within the Copyright Office's purview, but it's impossible to have a conversation about this without at least mentioning those rights and those laws, and the proper enforcement of those laws is essential to protecting artists in this context. But for the copyright piece of it, there's several ways in which copyright law is implicated. For one, as we mentioned earlier, in a lot of the situations of voice cloning, there's an extraction of the vocal stem from a sound recording that's used in pieces to train the AI system to improve the mimicking capability of the AI model. Those stems are themselves copyrighted works, and the reproduction of them in the process of this training is itself an infringing act. We're also seeing, I think also as it's described, forgive me for the repetition here, but a lot of instances of so-called covers where you have one artist's voice superimposed over the musical bed of an existing sound recording. So that artist seems to be singing a song that they had never recorded before. That underlying composition, or rather the underlying sound recording bed, is itself a copyrighted work, and that's infringement to distribute those and to reproduce those. And we've actually had some success in having those materials taken down under the DMCA from services. And then even when it's a true cover, where the artist's voice is used in a new rendition of a musical work, obviously there's as has been mentioned here, there's a musical work that requires a license. And I'm sure my publishing brethren on this panel can speak to this more authoritatively. But the copyright, and there's several other potential copyright violations. Section 1201, to the extent that stream ripping is used to amass your data set. Section 1202, to the extent that copyright management information is stripped out of these sound recordings that are used as training material in the ingestion process. There's a lot of other ways too. It's still early days, but there are a lot of problems that we see from a copyright angle.
Thank you, Garrett.
I just want to underscore 2 points that actually Ken made. The first is that for the most part, much of this feels that it sounds in the name, image, and likeness and right of publicity, which are state law issues rather than federal copyright law. And so I do think we need to be mindful of that and calls to extend federal copyright law in ways that has not been intended to do so. The second is actually to touch on something that another thing that Ken said, which is that the streaming services have shown a willingness to work with their partners in response to a lot of these conversations as they arise. Like, I don't know the specific details of what notices are sent and what the takedown looks like, but we have seen, particularly in the highest profile of these things that we all see publicly, that there is ongoing cooperation within the industry to respond to these emerging technologies and these emerging challenges as they arise.
Thank you. Ken, did you have anything further? Oh, your hand. I wasn't sure if your hand was still.
I'll just actually, yes, if I may, I'll just
sure.
respond to Garrett. And I appreciate everything Garrett just said. Just in point of fact, the compliance on the non-copyright notice takedown regime is, I should say, spotty at best. There's some unfortunate refusals to cooperate on that front. So that's, but as you say, that's a conversation that will continue.
Does anyone think there is any need to think about whether there should be uniform federal laws on these types of issues, or whether the state laws are sufficient to meet what's going on in the market?
Jason, if I could briefly.
Please go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, no, it's one of the things I was going to mention. I think there's a lot of concern across music and beyond with respect to actors and voice actors about this particular issue. The patchwork of state laws is not making things easier. And so we support a robust federal regime that will be easier to apply and will have more teeth. And even within the states that do have the laws, there's a difference about what is protected. And voice, right? Protection for quote unquote voice typically refers to one's actual voice, whereas one's identity, it can be broader and it can cover vocal mimicry, but not all laws protect identity. And so having a robust federal regime will be important in that regard, so what we know is what is protected. And then with respect to the takedowns that are discussed, again, echoing Ken's comments about it being, a voluntary and also potentially a regime that lacks sufficient teeth, and beyond the members of Garrett's organization, for example, would be even more problematic to force such compliance. So it will be more challenging, all the more reason why we need a robust right of publicity regime on a federal level.
Thank you. I see we are over on time. Rohan, I see your hands up. I can give you like 20 seconds, and then I'm going to hand it back to Chris for the final question.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that state by state issue of there being different laws state by state is part of what's causing people to create these contents. A lot of people wouldn't do it if they knew it was definitely illegal, but because it's kind of a gray area or they're not sure how it could be prosecuted, there's an influx of people creating it. So I think more clarity would definitely help.
Great, thank you. Chris, would you like to ask our final question?
Sure. We'll go over a little bit by about 5 minutes. So to the extent that you have an answer to this question, please try to keep it brief. What additional registration policy guidance, if any, would you like to see the office provide with respect to the registration of musical works and sound recordings that incorporate AI-generated elements? We'll go with Jason.
Hey, so as echoed by a lot of other panelists previously, I think we do need some more clarity on the copyrightability of works that are created using AI generated tools. Yes, we have some clarification already, selection and arrangement, but I think on both sides of the equation, whether you're talking about the AI companies and Alex, who's unsure, you know, what the copyrightability is of the works that are coming out of Boomi, and that affects downstream, you know, licensing considerations. If we had more clarity on that issue, and I think it would be helpful to create a framework for licensing on the input side.
Thanks. Jack is next.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very important to ensure that we can actually rely on our copyright registrations for protection. So we need to ensure that whatever the guidance is, that it's clear enough for humans to follow it, and we can easily register our works. What we don't want is to have this become a massively burdensome task that discourages anyone from registering. It's crucial that the guidance needs to be clear, and we thank the office for its careful consideration of these issues. And hope you'll continue to revise and clarify this guidance as both the office and applicants become more familiar with the process. It's also very important to create and maintain consistent international policy guidelines along the way. We appreciate the offer to work with the U.S. Copyright Office staff wherever there are questions regarding how an application should be handled or written. And I thank you.
Thank you. Tim.
Thanks. I'll just reiterate a point that I made in my opening remarks and sort of underscoring what Jack is saying, that I think that our copyright department will be quickly overwhelmed by the case-by-case analysis that seems to be required when there's AI content in a delivered work delivered by a songwriter. And I would hate to see our department or any copyright department having to make difficult choices in prioritizing registrations when works with AI content will enter a registration process that from day one will be defined by its backlog, at least on our end.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Alex.
Thanks, Chris. And I can keep this very short because I would just echo everything Jason said. The copyrightability of works created by different generative methodologies is totally paramount, especially during a time where I think, you know, some are fantasizing a world in which there are sentient Terminator style AIs that are nefariously competing with a powerful group of humans, which I just don't think is the world we live in. We live in a world of increasing access, increasing creative expression, and I'm wary of interests that want to restrict or gatekeep how we define who gets to be a musician, and copyright is one of those gates. In fact, it may be one of the most important gates, at least for how we monetize music today. So I appreciate sort of the thoughtful consideration of multiple views. And thanks so much again for allowing us to participate.
Okay, I want to thank everyone on the panel and hand it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you again to our panelists. We are now going to take a 10-minute break. For those of you who will be joining us for the second panel, we invite you to come back at 2:45. We'll be starting at 2:45. Thanks. This panel, like the first, will start with a brief introduction and short statement by each participant. We request that these statements be limited to 3 minutes. Moderators will be watching the time, and if you go over the allotted time, we may have to cut you off to reserve time for your fellow panelists. After the introductions, we will have a moderated listening session. Moderator questions, most of which panelists received in advance, are intended only as prompts for discussion, and we welcome participants to share relevant perspectives and experiences that they feel are important for the office to hear. Panelists who wish to speak should use Zoom's raise hand function, and our moderators will try to call on you in the order in which you raised your hands. Finally, we will again not be accepting questions from the audience today. If you are in the audience and you wish to share a question or comment with the Copyright Office, we will be soliciting written comments later this year. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our moderators for the second panel. John Riley is an Assistant General Counsel in the Office of the General Counsel, and Danielle Johnson is a counsel in our Office of Policy and International Affairs. The mic is yours, John.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everyone. We'll begin with introductory statements in the order stated on the agenda. As we asked you in advance, as part of your 3-minute statement, please tell us what you think is the most important for us to know about the use of generative AI in the music industry. For example, how is it being used? What are the opportunities and challenges, advantages and disadvantages? And what do you see to be the near and long-term industry impacts? Mr. Demigan, would you like to begin?
Sure. Thank you. My name is Anthony, co-founder and CEO of Tuni. I appreciate the opportunity to engage in the discussion, and I thank the Copyright Office for having me. Prior to founding Tuni, I spent over a decade producing and licensing music for marketing campaigns for large brands. Copyright safety is a big concern for brands, and I spent the majority of my career making sure music was produced, acquired, and licensed correctly to save my clients time and money and protect them from legal risk. When we set out to build a music automation platform with Tuni, we prioritized building a system that was copyright compliant and commercially viable from the very beginning, and also build technology that makes producing new music and adapting existing music more accessible to professional and casual creators. Tuni is a unique generative platform that uses human-made musical building blocks we call elements. Elements are either produced by Tuni in-house, commissioned as works for hire, or acquired from third parties. Elements can also be provided by a customer, for example, when we're working with a record label or a catalog which owns their own material. Tuni's algorithm can also version elements to be musically compatible with one another, and then assemble them into a finished track based on user inputs like genre, mood, length, and arrangement format. This lets users create music variations, edit length and narrative arc of a song, or change the genre with the click of a button. Working with audio, Tuni can also generate remixes of existing music through legal sampling. The generative element of Tuni, therefore, is in the assembly of new musical audio from existing musical audio, not synthesis from a large training data set. With this system, we avoid what we see are two big areas of legal ambiguity facing music automation platforms today. Lack of authorship, when a user does not provide enough creative input to be deemed an author, and difficulty attributing a single generated piece of music for proper tracking and remuneration models when an algorithm's training set might be in the tens or hundreds of thousands of individual compositions or authors. Tuni's vision is that generative tools provide the biggest value when they enable adaptation of existing music, or when they supercharge human creativity as a tool instead of replacing it. It has been our experience that consumers want more ways to interact with the music they already love versus generic music they don't have a relationship with. For music creators, the expectations are that generative tools will continue to lower the technical barrier to making great art around their musical ideas, as they've been doing already for several years. Therefore, we see Tuni's role in the ecosystem as lowering the technical barrier to produce, edit, and interact with music as we move towards a world where music consumption is less about static audio files in a database and more about a living, breathing art form that fans can interact with, content creators can easily adapt into their work, and musicians can use to make more great art in both a legally safe and a mind-blowingly fun way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Groves.
First off, I'd like to thank the Copyright Office for inviting me to participate and for seeking to learn more about this new challenge of AI in music. My name is Ryan Groves. I'm a composer, music theorist, machine learning specialist, and chief technology officer and co-founder at Infinite Album. We create infinitely playable streams of generative AI music for gamers. I'm also the director of a nonprofit group that organizes the international competition for artists collaborating with AI creative partners called the AI Song Contest. In the past, I was a lead product developer for a worldwide top 10 messaging app called Diddy, which used AI to turn chat messages directly into songs. I hold 9 AI music patents and won the Best Paper Award at Izmir, the world's leading conference for researchers in music information retrieval. Infinite Album approaches AI-generated music differently than most companies. Our music is infinitely generative, so music plays continuously until the user presses stop. Because our music is composed and performed in real time, we can make it reactive to outside inputs. So our main focus for this is gaming. Player actions and game events determine the direction of music. So it can get sad, for example, when a player loses a battle, or happy when it wins. If the gamer is live streaming as well, their viewers can temporarily change the style or motion of the music, or add guitar solos or lyrics, for example. And this applies to extended realities as well. Our engineers are all musicians, and we have a growing library of music that we've created. We're beginning talks with artists about licensing their music for our platform and generating music infinitely in their style. Our goal isn't to replace artists with AI. Our goal is to use AI to enable artists to create musical experiences that are impractical or even impossible for them to create on their own, and to do that on a scale that they couldn't achieve on their own. We feel strongly that AI music needs to be recognized as a copyrightable work. Even though we create music for gaming environments, it doesn't exist in a vacuum from the rest of the music industry. So music used in gaming live streams will turn up on YouTube and TikTok videos, for example. And without a copyright, it makes it difficult for us to collect revenue from those and other platforms and to share it with our artist partners. Additionally, as an industry, we should be finding ways to create efficiencies in how we attribute ownership to AI-generated works. The sheer number of credited authors on a work will explode once you include training data and as mashups of AI music proliferate. So in our case, we don't have definitive, predictably repeatable music to upload a reference to a reference database. Our music follows general composition rules with specific trained models and uses a specified set of instruments, so it's packaged, but the output will actually vary every time, often depending on user action in games. So it's not realistic or practical to commit each iteration of music as a separate copyright, and we're not the only ones doing infinitely generative music. We need a framework that recognizes the complexities of how AI music is created and includes it in the existing industry mechanisms for collecting and distributing revenue. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Hurwitz.
Hi, sorry about that. You'd think after almost 4 years, I know how to use the mute button. Hi, I'm Josh Hurwitz. I'm here today speaking on behalf of A2IM, the American Association of Independent Music. Thanks for including me in A2IM. As many of you may know, we are the trade association of the independent sector of music creators and record labels, not affiliated with the so-called major labels represented by our friends at the RIAA, with whom we share an aligned vision for the opportunities and potential risks associated with the use of generative AI to create music. A2IM has over 650 members in 35 states. And while many of our members are small businesses, indie labels have played a key role in the development of quintessentially American art forms like jazz, Motown, and hip hop over the years, with member companies like, for example, Sub Pop in Seattle becoming synonymous with grunge and punk rock, and Alligator in Chicago being synonymous with the blues. We're members of the Human Artistry Campaign, and I believe earlier today you guys heard from Ken at the RIAA outlining a number of quintessential issues that we agree with being necessary to discuss in this format, related to the use of sound recordings and large language models that propel generative AI. We believe that this does represent an existential threat to human creativity, and our bottom line is that as AI takes hold, rights holders will face increased pressures as their works compete in a zero-sum environment for attention and value-add opportunities like sync licenses. Rather than rehashing some of the bedrock copyright issues that I know others have touched on, I thought I'd take my time in this round to make 3 quick observations. First, for indie labels, the partnership with government agencies, with our distribution partners like DSPs, one of whom's represented here on the second panel, and with the burgeoning AI industry is critically important. Our experience is that with each new technology that takes the internet and digital distribution to new heights, innovation happens too quickly for policy to keep up. The onus ends up landing on the rights holders on the back end, often through the DMCA, to expend resources to clean up infringement. In A2IM's experience, that just doesn't work. In fact, in 2021, A2IM asked its members about the resources they deploy towards DMCA enforcement, and most companies said they'd simply given up. So there's a lot of incentive to get this right on the front end. With regard to ingestion, A2IM absolutely supports the notion that such use requires a license and compensation to the rights holders. And in today's conversation, we think we benefit from the observation that generative AI systems need not be fed copyrighted works from any given rights holder for the output of that system, the music created on the output, to immediately and directly undermine the commercial viability of a given rights holder's intellectual property. Generative AI systems don't necessarily need all of the music on Earth to start churning out music that has a commercial appeal and competes with human created work, just enough music. And so in that context, we need to guard against smaller rights holders being left out of the licensing agreements that will govern compensation for ingestion of copyrighted content. I have a couple other observations on the output side, but I think I'll leave those to try to inject as we move into the question and answer section. So, to sum up. Okay, great.
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Lewin. I am the Senior Director of Advocacy and Public Policy for the Recording Academy, the nation's leading organization for individual music makers. Collectively, the Academy represents some 23,000 individuals in the music industry. We have long worked closely and collaboratively with the Copyright Office to ensure sound policy with respect to matters impacting sound recordings and musical works. We are grateful to be invited to participate in today's roundtable and add the voice of the individual music maker to the discussion on artificial intelligence. Our perspective on AI is summed up neatly by one of our national trustees, John Legend, who said recently, quote, "AI is going to be a part of our lives, and it's going to be something that kind of augments our own intelligence, our own collective intelligence, and that's fine. But when it comes to using someone's likeness, using their intellectual property, I believe our rights should still be protected," end quote. In short order, generative AI has made the creation of new music affordable and attainable. Like innovative technologies and instruments that came before it, AI has quickly been embraced and incorporated into the production of music. But unlike the drum machines or auto-tune, AI is also expanding the universe of who can be a music creator, opening doors and unlocking opportunities for individuals to create and feed their creative passions. That is a good thing. The Academy believes that more diverse and accessible pathways to become a music creator, to join this industry, is a wonderful prospect. But as John Legend said, individual rights still matter. Intellectual property still matters. A robust copyright system that incentivizes human creativity still matters. We cannot and we should not sacrifice the rights of the individual for the sole purpose of technological advancement. Building off recent rulings like in Warhol, the Academy is hopeful that future guidance will soon come out from this office and other bodies that will ensure boldly that the human creator is protected when generative AI is used to produce music. We are eager for this guidance to more precisely address the uncertainties that come with the complex context of music production, which often involves many collaborators and steps. Last, the Academy is particularly concerned with the widespread use of an artist's name, likeness, and voice to promote, market, and distribute AI-generated music. We believe these documented uses bring up legal questions on the rights of publicity, but they also could be a rather implicit admission that the generative work was trained on copyrighted materials without permission from the copyright owner. It is not much of a leap to say that a song that is so prominently labeled and referred to as like Drake was in fact trained to some degree on the copyrighted works of Drake. In sum, there is a real need to craft policies that guides the use of AI in music while protecting the individuals behind the music. The Academy and our members look forward to aiding the office in this important policy-making endeavor.
Thank you. Mr. Love.
Thank you. I'm James Love. I'm speaking on behalf of Knowledge Ecology International. We're a nonprofit organization that works on intellectual property rights. I'm not part of the music industry. I'm a listener and subscriber, like everyone else, of recorded music. In the copyright field, I'm probably best known for my role in the WIPO, Marrakesh Treaty for the Blind, and our engagement in global norm setting for representing consumer interest. I will comment on consent, attribution, remuneration, and transparency of AI training data. But first, I just want to say that one size does not fit all. If you look at IP rules for other uses, such as text and data mining for drug development, you probably want different rules than you do for music. I want to, on the issue of consent, I've sort of prepared this with the idea that at some point, some type of statutory license, such as a mechanical license, might be available for people that are trying to get access to large amounts of recorded music for training data. And if that comes to be, we would hope that if there's an opt-in or opt-out option, that you would have opt-out rather than opt-in. One reason is that opt-in is that's problematic, concerns monopolies. Some entities will have the time, money, legal, and management resources to acquire large training data sets, while smaller entities won't. There's a risk of monopolies or dominant platform scenarios emerging, similar to what we see now in internet search and streaming platforms. While consent can slow down or temporarily degrade services over time, AI programs and well-financed entities will eventually overcome this. And the leverage that I think some people expect from consent may not be as robust as they expect or hope. On the topic of attribution, this is an important area. And it's not just for music, for all innovative and creative efforts. And it's controversial. I mean, people argue about who should have got Nobel prizes, or whether song, who's really deserves credit for certain popular songs. One thing that really can help is better metadata. The current inconsistent standards and practices and problems with accuracy and completeness are well known in the industry. Society, not just nationally, but globally, needs better incentives to improve metadata collection, curation, verification, sharing, and use. We think that AI can play a positive role in providing better metadata and better attribution. Compensation, litigation over copyright infringement is expensive, it's time-consuming. I think there's an opportunity here. I think that AI programs can provide a relatively low cost and fast way to evaluate and resolve disputes over remuneration for works, whether the works used AI or not. On transparency, if you want AI services to do a better job on metadata, on attribution, on compensation, the training data needs to be robust, and policymakers and artists and others need to be able to audit and test the services to ensure they're functioning in ways that are considered fair and useful. With such a diversity of interested parties and jurisdictions involved, thought needs to be given to the best governance structure, since they may replace, and in some cases, and to some extent, judges and juries. Finally, globally, measures to address better metadata, attribution, remuneration, et cetera, have a global dimension. And then we think the Copyright Office should ask the WIPO SSCR to use the current agenda item on copyright in the digital environment to address these issues, and also avoid provisions in trade agreements that restrict the ability of governments to audit or make code transparent related to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Singer.
Hi, my name is Howie Singer, and I was the chief technologist for the strategy group at Warner Music for 15 years. I have a PhD in engineering from Cornell, spent the first part of my career at Bell Labs, and currently teach data analytics in the NYU Music Business Program, and have consulted for several companies on the applications of AI to the music industry. Thanks to the Copyright Office for including me today in this informative session. I had a front row seat to the upheavals we experienced from Napster to Spotify, and the book I co-authored about the history of technology disruptions in the music industry from the phonograph to the current day, including artificial intelligence, will be published in September. And that history shows that positions on AI copyright will be driven by economic realities, both on the input side, meaning the songs used to train these systems, as well as on the output side, that is the music created by these new tools. In general, artists, rights holders will seek compensation for the use of their IP in training and control over whether content based on their compositions or voices may be distributed freely or not. That will yield new incremental revenues and minimize the negative impacts on current income. Every profitable industry adopts new technologies most readily when its current business is under stress. The growth rate for streaming revenues in the largest music markets has been declining. It's just math. The denominator gets bigger and the pool of non-subscribers gets smaller. And that economic reality will drive rights holders to urge higher streaming prices for services and to alter the methods of calculating royalties to favor quality music, think air quotes around quality, over the functional or less professional content that makes up so much of the 120,000 new tracks reportedly added to catalogs each day. And AI is poised to make that number go even more vertical. That means rights holders are open to new and creative licensing schemes. Economics drive the creators of the AI tools as well. They want to minimize their cost of goods, but are arguing that training is covered by fair use. And those arguments will be put forward, Warhol decision or not. They want to maximize revenues by distributing the music they create without constraint or payment, as long as it doesn't include exact copies of elements of the original. If history is any guide, this conflict will ultimately play out in conference rooms and courtrooms where licensing agreements and legal decisions will determine the outcome. Look forward to the rest of our discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Thank you. And thank you to the Copyright Office for the opportunity to participate. My name is Reagan Smith, and I'm here today on behalf of Spotify. AI is a rapidly developing space for all corners of the music industry, including distributors, and it makes sense to be both hopeful and careful about opportunities for music. New technologies have always pushed the art form forward, and as you heard from some of my colleagues, musicians are increasingly using AI-powered tools to create music, from mixing and mastering to overcoming writer's block to humming a tune that can become a sonic backdrop able to be edited. There is a potential to empower all levels of musicians, as other tools have done before. But even before the breakthroughs we see with AI, there have also been attempts to use computers to game the system, to game search results or recommendations. We will continue to take action and to monitor whether AI technologies increase the prevalence of this spam. Turning to copyright, the focus of this session, a few thoughts. First, AI or generative AI, it's not a uniform concept. It's not all of the same thing. We've heard of examples where AI is just used to create a sound effect as part of a larger creative endeavor. Other cases where a single text prompt is used to make a full song, and there's a lot in between, and it's early days. Use cases are going to continue to evolve, and recognizing the gray areas is going to advance policy conversations, including those related to provenance and consent. It will also help ensure that responsibilities and expectations can be applied to large and small players and operationalized across the supply chain. Second, AI discussions must not erode legal rules on the scope of protectable elements in a song or recording, or alter the standards for infringement. Recent litigation around songs ranging from Stairway to Heaven to Taylor Swift's Shake It Off show a shared industry-wide concern about copyright law restricting music creativity too much. Legally, if an arpeggio, ostinato, or groove is not copyrightable, it doesn't matter if it's used by a machine, Katy Perry, or Ed Sheeran. Third, in a music context, as we heard in the last session, other legal frameworks, including trademark, unfair competition, and personality or right of publicity laws, may bear more directly on some of these questions than copyright. The office should resist a push to stretch doctrines to address situations more properly addressed by other bodies of law. Next, as a licensee that takes delivery of tracks with associated metadata, digital services cannot determine the way content was made or if it was legal, including whether and how AI was used in the production, what the AI was trained on, or whether use of the AI tool was sanctioned or problematic. Metadata related to this would need to be provided with delivery of the track. The NTIA's recent consultation asked about different responsibilities across the value chain, and that may be a useful way for the office to think about the roles of creators, rights holders, AI platforms, and distributors. And then finally, since this is the final listening session, I've noticed that many of these questions have been technical or operational and are going to benefit from further industry dialogue or standard settings conversation, especially for music. It's also true that existing legal frameworks are likely to address many of the developments we are seeing. The Copyright Office may be able to be especially helpful, employing its convening function to facilitate the exchange of views, rather than committing to an approach that does not hold up over time. These are complex issues, and it's important to have dialogue to get the right balance. And so we thank you for convening this session.
Thank you. Ms. Sorensen.
Thanks, John. And thank you to the Copyright Office for convening these listening sessions. My name is Shannon Sorensen. I am the Senior Vice President of Legal and Business Affairs at the National Music Publishers Association. We were fortunate to hear from two of our members on the previous panel today. What I want to underscore is the importance of protecting human creators and respecting copyright in the face of developments in generative AI. NMPA supports the advancement of AI technology. Generative AI as a tool has immense promise and potential, but it needs to be used responsibly and in a way that upholds the underlying goals of our copyright system. We need to bear in mind the impact of these technologies on human creators and ensure that policies around AI preserve the viability of human artistry and the creative industries that support it. To that end, AI developers should not be given a free pass to commit copyright infringement, either on the input side or on the output side of their systems. While there are some good actors, some of whom we've heard from during these listening sessions, the unfortunate reality of the industry today is that many generative AI companies in the music space are commercial businesses that were built on the backs of human creators by taking their music without permission. Copyright law protects creators' exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, and authorize the creation of derivative works based on their works. AI developers need to comply with copyright law and obtain licenses for their training data. AI ingestion should not be categorically or presumptively considered fair use. Fair use is a highly fact-specific and case-by-case analysis. But in the case of generative AI, that takes copyrighted human-made works and uses them to make new content that competes in the marketplace with the very copyrighted works that it was trained on, that's unquestionably not fair use. That would cannibalize the marketplace for licensing human created music and would harm the long-term economic viability of human creative industries. Without question, that is beyond the intention of our fair use laws. The recent decision in Warhol underscores the fact that transformativeness is not dispositive of fair use, and that you need to look at the purpose of the secondary use and whether that purpose supplants the use of the original work. In the case of generative AI, we often see that supplanting, and we will probably see more of it as these developments continue. As a legal and policy matter, the market for direct licensing for AI training needs to be preserved. Creators must have the freedom to choose how and whether they want their works to be used and for what price. They need to be able to engage in direct free market licensing. Direct licensing is the proper venue to address a lot of the unknown questions about AI developers' use of copyrighted works and what limitations are put on the outputs and things like that. All of the sort of safeguards that we need in the outputs, a lot of that can be addressed by direct licensing. I also want to highlight the importance of transparency and record keeping. There need to be standards set to require transparency regarding the contents of databases that AI developers use to train their algorithms, how those databases were put together, where the data came from, and record keeping of how everything in those data sets are used. There also need to be transparency requirements on the aggregators, web crawlers, and scrapers that compile those databases. These databases that are compiled often include copyrighted material, and that needs to be tracked. Thank you. I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, Shannon. Ms. Stinson.
Thanks to the United States Copyright Office for allowing me to share my perspective. My name is Tara Stinson, and I am a vocalist, composer, author, and Oscar-nominated songwriter. I'm a proud member of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, the Television Academy, and the Society of Composers and Lyricists. But it's important to note that my opinions that I will express today are my own. I'm here today to give voice to and advocate for songwriters and composers who, like me, are alarmed about AI and how it could impact our lives. The obvious concern is this battle of man or woman against machine. We do not have the superhuman powers required to turn out songs or art of any kind at speeds comparable to deep learning algorithms. That and the name and likeness heist that we're facing as music creators is unprecedented. The voices of the biggest recording artists in the world are being replaced with deep fake replicas without their permission and currently with few repercussions. While the things that we make as humans can be copyrighted, unfortunately, our styles, our likenesses, our voices, and some of the things that makes us human currently cannot. I am aware that all AI isn't evil. Many of us engage in simple AI tools every day. Rule-based AI is extremely useful. Composers that use Ableton, Logic, Pro Tools, MIDI, Auto-Tune, and other plugins can attest to this, but we must separate rule-based AI from deep learning AI while having conversations related to the livelihood of creatives. I stand in solidarity with screenwriters who in part just want to know that studios won't use deep learning AI to write their stories. Songwriters and composers want the same assurance. Profit over people is what it could come down to. And in this case, the law is on our side. Copyright law asserts that only original works of authorship can be copyrighted, provided that they are work created by a human. No human, no protection. Since algorithms themselves currently can't hold copyrights, thank goodness, then people who use these deep learning tools to masquerade as someone else should not be able to obtain or monetize their work. Text to models have the biggest potential to harm composers, since anyone can type in words about what kind of music they want, and the AI model will generate it in a matter of seconds. Again, as creatives, we should be able to utilize everything from nature to emerging technological advances to inspire us. After all, ChatGPT will soon be a standard feature with Microsoft Word. It's here to stay. But our tools should not be able to steal our voices or write us out of our own stories. Thank you. Looking forward.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Tardif.
Hi, thanks. My name is Nicholas Tardif, and I'm litigation counsel at Universal Music Group. Universal Music Group, or UMG, is the world leader in music-based entertainment, with a broad array of businesses engaged in recorded music, music publishing, music-focused merchandising, and audiovisual content. As those who have read the news about the AI fake Drake song may assume, UMG is very much on the front lines of generative AI music. We know that nearly all of the large language generative AI models have trained on UMG's assets without authorization. Our sound recordings, compositions, and cover art. Essentially, everything we've registered with the Copyright Office. And one of my tasks at UMG is to review a fast-growing list of AI-generated works that infringe on UMG's copyrights or our artist's name, image, and likeness rights. And I typically review about 200 AI-generated works every day. And we currently have a queue of more than 4,000. And of course, these are just the ones that we find. So we deeply appreciate the Copyright Office's attention to this important issue. And when it comes to generative AI and music, UMG has a few core beliefs. On the input side, copyright law clearly requires that copyrighted works that are used to train AI must be licensed. Indeed, UMG licenses our catalog to hundreds of digital business partners around the world. It really escapes logic that generative AI enterprises don't have to do the same. Additionally, transparency, responsibility, and trustworthiness are critical. Generative AI models should be required to detail their training data. Consumers have a right to know when something has been manipulated by generative AI. And additionally, on the output side, the Copyright Office got it right. Human input, direction, and creativity should always be a requisite of copyright registration. And finally, using generative AI to create deep fake sound recordings or images that use an artist's name, image, or likeness without their consent is illegal and deeply disturbing. So with these in mind, UMG, we approach AI with a two-pronged strategy. First, it's our responsibility to vigorously defend our artists and songwriters' rights. And we will do so using every legal tool at our disposal. Likewise, insisting on trustworthiness means it starts with us. We won't work with a generative AI model that we know is trained on copyrighted works without authorization. not just our own catalogs, but anyone's. And second, done legally and respectfully, generative AI can provide an opportunity for our artists and songwriters. So we promote, encourage, and license ethical AI, which is generative AI that respects copyright law and allows for a creator to exercise choice, self-determination, consent, creative direction. Ethical AI is lawful, transparent, and elevates artistic creativity, does not supplant it. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you, everyone, for those introductions. To begin the discussion, we are interested in learning more about how creators are using and plan to use generative AI in the creation of musical works and sound recordings. Can you please expand on this? And in responding, please discuss your views on whether there are situations where generative AI is used as a tool as part of a larger creative process driven and controlled by a human being. And I see Mr. Groves first.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. We see this being used by creators as part of the creative process. As a director of the AI Song Contest, there are so many facets of the music creation process that now have AI-driven tools to facilitate that process. So anywhere from generating lyrics to generating melodies to generating the audio for backing instruments, generating chord progressions, using Google Magenta's Ableton plugins to generate bass lines, applying human performance to drum patterns. And what we've seen is there's incredible artistry in the selection and usage, and sometimes even the sort of misuse or using models in a way that they're not intended to be used. There's an incredible amount of creativity that's happening with the use of these models, and there's a huge amount of models that are available, and there is a huge wide range. To emphasize what Regan mentioned, there's a huge gradient of what these models can do, and there's a huge gradient in terms of what they've been trained on and how they're applied. So to give an example, Magenta's instrument synthesis model, they hired a saxophone player to play for 30 minutes. And that's a deep learning model, fully copyright safe, open source, not infringing any copyright. And you can use that to generate the performance of the saxophone if you're not a saxophone player. So yes, absolutely. There's a huge growing community. And what we've seen with the AI Song Contest is there's even immersion community that is using AI models to preserve cultural heritage. So leveraging AI models to use to synthesize traditional Thai instruments and using a particular model that doesn't require Western scales. So this is a huge creative opportunity in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Demican.
Thanks. Yeah, what we've seen in working with a lot of video creators is the desire to manipulate and edit music without having musical technical abilities. So this has long been a challenge for video editors who are not musical by nature to take a licensed piece of music and adapt it to a piece of video. Obviously, in order to do that with great results, your algorithm needs to understand the underlying musical complexities of what that piece does, because it can't be blindly rearranging that piece to fit the video, or it would need a lot more input from the user. And if the user is non-technical, then they'll have a hard time doing that. I think, in the next 12 months or so, I anticipate that we will see a lot more tools that allow a music creator to collaborate with these tools in a broader way than what audio plugins, AI-powered audio plugins, have allowed people to do, by lowering the technical barrier to near zero. And then I think the interesting question that will come up there is how much creative input is too little, before you could say that was a creative work by the person who used that tool to make something. And my personal belief is that I've been playing music my whole life. Granted, I'm a drummer, so I need other people around me to make melodic music, or else it's just a bunch of noise. But my experience has always been that you at least need some unique chord progressions and melodies in the mix before you could start laying claim to it. And what's nice about what we've seen in terms of sort of users and creators feedback is that if you don't have that component, it's hard for people to feel ownership over it and feel like this is something that they made, which I think lowers the value of the output. I think if you can press a button and create something that all you did was press a button to do, it kind of diminishes your relationship with it.
Thank you. Mr. Singer.
Thanks. I think that one of the things that we've seen is this even greater fragmentation of genres and types of music that people opt to select. Just look at the wide variety of playlists that are available in different genres on Spotify, to pick someone who's participating in this panel as well. And we know already that artists work to create different kinds of content for different audiences. We can go all the way back to Shania Twain's Up album, which was engineered to have 3 different versions that appealed to pop and country and fans of Indian movie music. We could start to see tools allowing artists to do that kind of thing themselves, and take it even to a finer level. I already get a personalized playlist of music I like. Maybe I prefer music with more cowbell. I might be able to get that. Again, with the permission of the artists and the rights included, we're going to see music that's tailored not just for exercise or studying or sleep, but actually music that matches tastes for individual users. And that could generate incremental revenue, for artists and greater connections.
Thank you. Mr. Tardif.
Yeah, thanks. I won't belabor this, but I just want to say, at UMG, we expect our artists and writers will use generative AI kind of as a tool in the creative process, like with a human guiding hand kind of supporting their own creative input. And it really has to be about artistic control and, using a tool that enhances but doesn't really decide or supplant. On this panel and the prior panel I've talked, there's all sorts of tools in the studio that artists can use in this regard, and they're not new. So, and I just wanted to highlight a couple other examples, that we're excited about at UMG. One is one of our distributed artists, South Korean artist Lee Hyun. He recently used a generative AI system called Supertone to train on his recordings of his vocals. It allowed him to kind of simultaneously release a single in 6 languages in his own voice on the same day. And here he used an ethically trained AI tool that really enhanced and extended his creative intent, and importantly, with his own consent. And it also enabled him to reach new markets and fans. And one additional one, we recently announced a partnership with Endel, which is a generative AI tool that derives like functional soundscapes to help facilitate like sleep and focus and meditation. And it's driven by like scientific insights into how music affects our mind state. And this deal will allow our artists to use Endel to help create new or derivative recordings that are built from their own stems or sound recordings. And importantly, artists can elect to use this tool to drive and control the creative results with their own approval rights. So these are a couple of things we're excited about.
Thank you. And Mr. Hurwitz.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to take a quick moment in reflection on the observation that Mr. Groves made regarding AI tools that say could synthesize the sound of a traditional Thai instrument, to point out that on the output side, if commercialized, that work, the same as any other work, would displace or runs the risk of displacing the commercial viability of, say, world music labels based here in the United States, who go to great lengths to amplify the works when they're culturally appropriate, especially in that space as well. So totally get that, there is a benefit to lifting up non-Western musical traditions, but I think focusing on the human creation thereof is just as appropriate as in Western contexts. Also, just a quick point, I don't know that much work has been done in the music generative AI space, but certainly in the more general generative AI space, there has been, and there's a mounting, body of literature pointing out issues related to bias, and especially Western focused bias, that perhaps we should consider when looking at non-Western musical expression as captured by AI tools.
Oh, thank you. And Mr. Love, I see your hand is up. Was that an accidental hand raised, Mr. Love?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's I mean, all the speakers. I mean, there's all this talk about consent. I think consent is overrated in the copyright area. I mean, the recorded music industry thrives on the use of the fallback mechanical license, which doesn't require consent from the authors. And you don't need consent from an author to perform live music. And all the artists that are walking around are just soaking up as much information they can from their fellow artists all the time. I mean, they're all influenced by other people all the time, and they don't have to get permission for that. And I think that the concerns about attribution, the concerns about remuneration, compensation are important. I just think it's a mistake to sort of bring everything back to the idea that people want to have this ironclad consent. That's just basically, if done in an aggressive way, is really going to degrade the models. But also, if you extend that copyright model to things like drug development and things like that, it's going to be it's going to be quite harmful, regardless of whether you think it's a good idea or not within the music area.
Great, thank you. I have one last hand for this question, and then we'll move on. So turning to you, Ms. Sorensen.
Thanks. I just want to respond to that. I couldn't quite let consent is overrated go without saying something. From our perspective, representing copyright owners, consent is of paramount importance. And I think direct licensing, again, as I said before, is the right venue. There are a lot of concerns about compulsory licensing and the way that it results in chronic undervaluation of art and of music. And it makes an uphill battle for creators to achieve fair market value, whereas direct licensing is not that same uphill battle. There's not this inability to say no that you have in compulsory licensing. And then on the question of people being influenced, of course, human authors are influenced all the time. And, that's something that you expect when you release music. But there's a really big difference between a human learning from music that they listen to and being influenced by music that they listen to, and an AI doing that. A human can't listen to the entire volume of all the recorded music that has ever been released in the span of a day or instantaneously, and then put out millions of tracks with the same speed and scale that an AI can. So I think we need to make clear when we're talking about the ways that AI and generative AI are going to impact the marketplace for human music, not to conflate this idea that generative AI is somehow the same as human creators. It's not. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll now turn this back over to John for the next question.
Thank you. And I would also thank my panelists for keeping their comments as concise as possible, because we have a lot to get through today. Ms. Sorensen's comments actually dovetail very neatly into our next question. So I'm going to ask it here. We've heard how certain AI models, generally those for text and images, are trained, and the concerns that creators and copyright owners have with models that use their copyrighted works without permission as part of the training process. Can anyone discuss any licensing activity happening in this area, and the willingness on the part of creators and copyright owners to license their musical works and sound recordings for training generative AI systems, as well as the willingness on the part of AI technologies to license those works? Ms. Stinton.
Hi, Stinson. I think something that I want to talk about, I pulled up the data for Common Crawl, the data aggregator for many large language models, including ChatGPT. And their most recent data set is 46.175 English. So when it comes to music across the globe, these text-based models, there's a bias toward music that's either in English or described by English. And so it can't be just going back to the point of it being culturally diverse and protecting and preserving cultural legacies. It's just like at this point, how is the math doesn't add up for me. I know that many of you are here representing your companies. This is a talent that I was born with as a songwriter, as a composer, and I should not have to battle these machines when it comes to representing my culture, using my voice, stealing my voice. There's just so much to unpack here, and I know that everyone has their agenda, but my agenda is inherent. It's my heart. I'm a human here, and I think that a lot of this conversation is not pointed toward humans and how it really will affect us as songwriters, as composers, as people.
Thank you, and please excuse my mispronunciation. Ms. Sorensen.
Thanks. Sorry, just to clarify, are we on 2B or 2C? Are we talking about our concerns with music in the database, or are we talking about licensing? I got a little.
This is 2C.
Okay, thank you. For our members, there have been licensing discussions for generative AI. They haven't panned out yet. There definitely is licensing discussions, or there has been licensing in the past for AI that's non-generative. And there's been, permission obtained for different uses, which is, I think, a good benchmark to look at. But when it comes to generative AI, what we're seeing a little bit is a hesitance to engage in licensing conversations for the ingestion side. We've heard, we can talk about licensing for the output, like language models that display lyrics, in the same way that everyone that displays lyrics has to get a license for that. But on the ingestion side, what we've heard is, we're happy to talk about it in court.
And that's from both copyright owners and AI technology companies, or just copyright owners?
From the technology companies. Copyright owners are very willing to talk about licensing for ingestion. It's been met with resistance from AI companies who are just saying it's fair use across the board and we don't need licenses for this. And we obviously disagree with that.
Thank you. Mr. Lewin.
Yeah, similar point. Just quickly, we're kind of in the wild, wild west still here with respect to the legal teeth. So I think more clear policymaking guidance could spur more private market deals being brought to the table and bring both sides to a point where they're willing to negotiate. Right now, we're probably not really seeing that. I know there's been some examples discussed already about some deals that have been placed, but absence of real clear guidance from this office and other policymaking bodies, we're lacking that sort of incentive to bring everyone to the table to negotiate.
Thank you. Ms. Milov.
Well, one concern we have about license arrangements is whether you lead to a concentration in terms of the platforms that control the most licenses. And I don't think it's a trivial issue. I mean, we already have a lot of concentration in the labels and the platforms to begin with. So if it's too burdensome, too costly, too complicated, too expensive to license, I mean, the large companies with really deep pockets, they'll end up with a lot of data. And it's also not obvious who really has in a position to license the data. I mean, maybe Universal has a lot of contracts and they probably, give them, really sweeping rights on things. But there's so many rights in recorded music right now between different authors and in different jurisdictions. And it's not just the United States too, because the music travels around the world. So I think the complexity is going to be costly and difficult, and that's one of the reasons why I think some kind of extended license, statutory license, is probably a better approach. And also, I think you have to confront the fact that one of the problems in general with AI, if you have to have huge data sets in order to do good quality training, you run the risk of a lot of monopolization and dominant players in the area, and I don't think that's a good thing. So you might want to think about essential facilities doctrine type mandatory sharing of access to large databases as well at some point in order to avoid monopolies.
Thank you, Mr. Tardif.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll be brief. From UMG's perspective, there is a willingness to license, and we're in early conversations with several generative AI companies, that did not train on unlicensed copyrighted content. So, licensing, it's not difficult, but it really has to be thoughtful and careful. And, we need to figure out the best way to protect our artists before, discussions of licenses or ingestion. We know the vast majority of large learning generative AIs have trained illegally, not just on our catalogs, but on the copyrighted works of others. And, we're not willing, or we don't want to partner with an entity that doesn't act legally or ethically. So in that case, we're sending a message to these companies: act ethically, respect copyright law and artists, and we're happy to talk.
Thank you. I want to have a follow-up question very briefly for anyone who has an opinion on this, but there's been some comments about consent and some comments about statutory licensing. The music industry probably has a unique perspective with respect to statutory licensing. Can anyone speak to briefly why statutory license might be a good or bad fit for licensing copyrighted musical works and sound recordings for AI training? Ms. Sorensen.
Yeah, happy to take it. As I said before, our experience with compulsory licensing is that it's not resulting in the proper valuation, and it makes this really difficult to accomplish the proper valuation for music when you don't have the ability to say no. We also don't think that it's sufficiently flexible. At this point, when a lot of these questions are so new, the licenses between AI developers and copyright owners would have to address a lot of big questions, like what's the size of the training data as compared to the parameters on the model to make sure that you don't have overfit or underfit issues, and what kind of things can be done with the output, and what sort of limitations should be put on what the algorithm can make, or how much of the copyrighted work could be reproduced in an output. There's a lot of questions like that that need to be answered in these licensing conversations and can be answered in direct licensing conversations. When that's done at scale, it's not going to accurately represent the value. And I don't think it is the right fit anyway, given that a lot of, the future of generative AI is probably a little bit more specialized and for special purposes than what we're talking about at an abstract level here. And those licenses are going to need to reflect the exact purposes for which the copyrighted material is going to be used. It doesn't make a lot of sense to just say overall, here's everything that ever has been created and go ahead and use it. Like, there need to be safeguards in those licenses. And that's why we need direct licensing, so that that can all be tailored.
Thank you. Did you have an additional comment, Mr. Love? You will need to unmute, sir.
I want to this issue about whether or not the same rules apply. In the copyright, of course, it's not just music. If you talk about what's fair use or not in AI, it really extends to all kinds of other things that are going on. And one thing I would encourage is it's better, I think, to have a more nuanced approach toward music that doesn't apply to science, for example. Now, there's a lot going on in science that's really important. It's important medically. It's important strategically for the United States. It's important in a lot of areas. And I don't think you want it to be handicapped with the same type of restrictive licensing things that people are dreaming up from the music industry here. And so I think to the extent that you can sort of look at the music as a special case, it's better than like just sort of saying the copyright system dictates X, Y, and Z. Because if you apply this to other parts of the copyright system, it's really harmful. And the other thing is that there's not much. I'll give one example in licensing that I saw, which is an example of really a bad outcome. When Kindles came out and you had a machine that could read text to speech, blind people really were elated because they could use the text-to-speech on a Kindle to read books that they had never had access to before. Immediately, they're sued by the Authors Guild, there was all these sort of, and there was all this pressure on the publishers to assert like a non-copyright contractual right, because they said, well, we license you to put the text on a Kindle, but not to use this little text-to-speech engine. And so that was turned off, including like in President Obama's biography, for example. So, and that was just crazy from our point of view. So I think that when you give some group, they think, well, we have some rights we have to protect. We're a trade association. We have all kinds of members. We have to do our best by them. They will overreach. And I think you can predict that right now.
Mr. Hurwitz, and then Mr. Tardif, and then we are going to move on to the next question. Thank you.
So just quickly, notwithstanding my prior observation about making sure that small rights holders have an ability to get compensation in any sort of final scheme, I would note that free market negotiation is a mechanism not just to arrive at the proper level of compensation, but also conditions on which the licensing is predicated. And so for a rights holder, that creates an opportunity potentially to mitigate some of the output displacement risks, and we think would be valuable and a valuable opportunity that rights holders should be able to avail themselves of.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So I just want to say it's, this is a unique kind of licensing. Like, if a creator's work is used to train a generative AI model, the outputs of that model could compete against the artists in the marketplace. And there are really no limits to how many works it could produce. So it would flood the marketplace. So any licensing of training sets, it really needs to be thoughtful, careful, and respectful. And any deals we do, I want to reiterate, must be artist-centric. It has to be dependent on artist choice, compensation, and credit received. And for us to start those conversations with a potential partner, we need to know that all training data going into the system was lawfully licensed.
Thank you. My colleague Danielle has the next question.
Thanks, John. Our next question: what effect is the production and distribution of AI-generated music having or expected to have on streaming, including from the perspectives of the digital services, their users, the copyright owners and creators, as well as the AI companies? Mr. Dimikin, I see you first.
I'm going to get a more fun response to this out of the way before the not so fun responses follow. I think from a opportunity perspective, there's a lot of exciting opportunities to create derivative works of existing copyright, either old recordings that have been forgotten, under monetized assets that record labels and publishers have that could be could have new life breathed into them, where remixing these things manually is way too costly and risky, to do at scale. And also, when you look at the arbitrary nature of the TikTok algorithm and what pops and doesn't pop, you kind of want to try a lot of different things, and you don't know what's going to recoup and what's not going to recoup. And these technologies, and our technology in particular, is going to enable that. And it won't be that difficult to track because, the one thing that we've purposefully focused on is making sure that we have kind of one-to-one attribution versus dumping a ton of copywritten material, even if it's licensed, into a deep learning or black box model, and then created derivatives on the other end. So I'm super excited at that potential, and obviously all those derivatives works will be monetized predominantly through streaming royalty revenues.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Thank you. Maybe this will be the less fun response, who knows? But I think, many businesses are having a lot of discussions about how to manage the power of AI technologies. I think you've got a lot on this panel and the one before about the opportunities that AI enhanced or AI generated music can bring to assist creators, including professional musicians. From a digital service perspective, Spotify has long used machine learning, of course, to power recommendations that help artists and writers connect with their fans, build their career, and help them figure out where to go next. Earlier in the year, it introduced an AI DJ, which is a personalized DJ that will deliver a curated lineup of music alongside generated commentary about the tracks and the artists. It's pretty fun. The voice was modeled after a Spotify employee, our head of cultural partnerships, Xavier Jernigan or X, and the feedback so far has been really positive as an exciting way to help fans discover and rediscover music. turning to some of the distribution issues, I think one way to conceive of it is to remember that streaming is a model that's based around what's actually listened to and not just what is uploaded. So if you have sort of bot-made dribble, it's not necessarily going to travel very far. Recommendation algorithms typically favor content where users are saving something, where they like it, there's repeat listening, and when there's a connection with, perhaps an artist page. We would also want to separate developments over generative AI or other computer generated music that we're talking about today with concerns over stream manipulation. So if a sound is created by a computer and it appeals to a listener, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Just look at the rise of electronic music and other genres. But as I mentioned, I think in the opening statement, we have seen now examples of mass created computer generalized music, and we will continue to action those types of tracks and activities and look at that. I don't think that necessarily is showing a weakness in copyright law, however, per se. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Singer.
Yes, I mean, there was an article, it was actually this morning, so it's hard to keep up with all the AI developments, about a Singaporean singer named Stephanie Sun, whose music took off in China. The only problem that the music that took off were all AI generated fakes of her voice. And she said, I quote her, "My fans have officially switched sides and accepted that I am an unpopular singer while my AI persona is the current hot property. I mean, how do you fight with someone who's putting out new albums every few minutes?" the singer asks. And I know it's awfully hard for the services to distinguish between the content that is real and generated by AI. This gets back to the ethical question of, are these companies going to label appropriately what is fairly created? What are copies? Here's a performer whose livelihood is being compromised because of the services being flooded with content that is based on her voice, but she's not being compensated for. So I think that it is a difficult problem, and it's one that, if the technology companies and the rights holders can work together to figure out how to label this content appropriately, and drawing a line is hard, I understand that. We will need to find a way to do that, though, because we have artists already facing that.
Thank you. Mr. Lewin.
So I think, as I said earlier and others have said, it's never been easier to commercially upload a song and earn a royalty or dilute the pool on a DSP than ever before. So there definitely needs to be more robust safeguards in place. That probably starts with better transparency on data and record keeping with these learning models, just so that the creators and their teams have an ability to identify the infringement and file the right takedown notice. But at the Academy, we're particularly concerned about how this burden is going to particularly affect independent creators and independent songwriters who are already powerless in this fight against generated content out there. And this is only going to multiply with generative AI as this explodes, and we're already seeing it explode. They don't have any recourse right now. I think Mr. Tardif mentioned in his opener that he has a queue of 4,000 cases, and that's at Universal. That's a major of the major. It's the biggest music company in the world. How is a independent creator, an independent songwriter supposed to fight back against this? They don't have the power. They don't have the means. They don't have the time or the resources to file these notices and really police the internet. It's going to take a fraction of a second to have your rights infringed and exploded 1 billion times with AI, and you're only one person to be able to police this. And I'd also like to point out, we're talking about this often in a prism of the major platforms that are out there, like Spotify, the good actors. There's also been a proliferation of new platforms that are using strictly AI generated music that are not necessarily understanding the rules of the road or are ethical in their nature. So we have a big problem here, and I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg, and definitely we'll need to see more guardrails in place to ensure that independent creators, all music creators, have the ability to have their music protected and have their creativity protected.
Thank you. We'll hear from Ms. Stinson next, and then move on to the next question. Ms. Stinson.
Hi, just really quickly, I think that just in general, we already have issues as songwriters and just artists in general. We have issues with streaming income and how it's divvied up and how we're represented as independent artists, completely different. But when you're signed, you don't have much of a say in your copyrights. So I think this is just going to deepen that wound. That's just my my opinion. And that's all really I want to say.
Well, thank you. And back over to you, John, for the next question.
Thank you. We've seen some news stories about songs being released into the market that have been sung by AI-generated voices that sound like famous performers. Can you please tell us your views on the use of generative AI to imitate or simulate the voice of a particular recording artist, the use of new recordings, including especially whether there are any particular copyright implications, or as referenced earlier, is copyright not suited to address this issue? And you may want to expand your answer, Mr. Lillen, just, excuse me, reference some enforcement challenges. If you want to talk about any enforcement challenges that AI-generated tracks are presenting to you, please do so. All right. Maybe Mr. Groves, maybe first.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think there's a bit of a misnomer here where we're talking about AI-generated voices, and the technology behind this is not fully generative. So the way that this works is actually you have to record yourself singing, and it's actually a voice transformation model. So in this particular case, the risk of this exploding is not because of the AI, but just because of the ability for anybody to use it. So people are creating recordings of themselves and transferring their voice into, Drake or whoever. And so that technology is available, but this is still almost a 50-50 contribution of a human and a machine in this particular case. So we're calling it AI generated, but that's a bit of a misnomer. And it's sort of a similar case and example that I gave of the Thai artists. There was a Thai performer performing that, and that performance was translated into a Western instrumental system with Western instruments. So even in that case, the artist has continued working with traditional Thai artists who are ecstatic to work with this. So when we're talking about this stuff, we are often conflating consent with copyright. In the current environment, I totally understand why there's a huge uproar because the consent is not being given by these artists. I fully support consent. There's a fantastic initiative by Holly Herndon, who's this very amazing innovator and artist who has created Spawning AI, and it's haveibeentrained.com. So she's creating repositories of artists who are saying, I don't want to be trained with music. But what we're not talking about as much is the situation where consent is given. So if you give that example that Nicholas gave for Lahoon, who just released 6 generated soundtracks, the Copyright Office has said, oh, those soundtracks are not copyrightable because they're AI generated. So how is Lahoon supposed to capture his work, his artistic input, if those works can't be copyrighted? And it's the same thing with the Singaporean artist that Howie mentioned. If she had control over those and she had given consent and partnered with an AI firm or whatever, similar to what Grimes is doing, giving her consent to her voice, this creates a huge new opportunity. So those works could, if the copyright is established for those works, then artists can benefit for those works. And it's the same situation that we're dealing with, is that we're working with artists. We're creating these, generative models around an artist's style, but we're not able to copyright the output because of the copyright issues, because of this copyright decision. So that means that we can't track this on TikTok. We can't track this on YouTube. We can't earn revenue from that AI-generated content, and therefore we cannot remunerate our artists that we're working with in a completely consensual way, with their permission, with licenses. It's just not possible. So that's a huge limitation. And so we keep talking about dilution, and there are so many new opportunities for these artists. It's not just we're not going to see a single business model in the future with these AI tools.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate there may be some questions today that overlap on certain topics. We are going to get back to our registration guidance as our final topic, but I want to make sure we have enough time for that. So I'm going to go next on my screen, which is Mr. Demikin.
Yeah, just very, very quickly about the sort of the voice cloning piece, and I'll echo what Ryan said as well. I think the way that it's being used today and the stuff that's making the headlines is not super interesting, because it's not. I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, we're talking about it, but it's not interesting in a long term from a business perspective, because I think it's not scalable. Like Ryan said, like a human needs to go and make a song and then The other thing is it's basically like equity jacking. Somebody's taking the equity of an artist and then putting usually not as good of a song on, taking that person's precious voice and soul and putting it on a usually like not as good of a composition, unfortunately. So I think in the short term, the way that's working is not ideal. But I think in the long term, if there is both a legal framework and tracking technology, which right now, we're just kind of still in the early days, so it's really hard to track all this stuff. But if there is tracking technology and there is a legal framework, I think it presents an awesome opportunity for artists to further monetize themselves. So if a famous artist or a not famous artist could grant those rights to fans or grant them to a generative music company that could create works where that person's compensated every time that work makes money, I think it opens up a slew of amazing use cases. And we hope to participate in that when that infrastructure is there. And especially for artists who decide to retire, and don't want to like make the music themselves, but still might want to make their voice, name, likeness, etc. available and passively earn from that, into retirement. I think that would be really cool.
Great. In the interest of time, I'm going to call on our next four participants here, Ms. Stinson, Mr. Lewin, Mr. Love, and then Mr. Tardif to close things out on this question. If you could keep your comments brief, we can have a little time for our closing. I'm just a little mindful of the time. Thank you.
Regarding deepfakes, my voice belongs to me. Drake's voice belongs to him. I said it before, it's a likeness heist, voice jacking. Consent is the only way that this should even be a discussion. Grimes has spoken, she will give consent based on 50% of ownership, but Drake said enough is enough, and I'm rocking with Drake. I think enough is enough. Like, I should not, if I am the child of someone who passed away, I should not have to hear his voice if I don't want to.
I'll just point out that there's a website, aihits.co, that I guess it's kind of a cross between Billboard and like SoundCloud or Spotify, that tracks, and you can also play AI generated music directly there. It has like a running tally of how many times that's been streamed. It's in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And every single one of the songs in the top 10, top 20 invokes the name of a popular artist or the style of a popular artist, either directly in the title or in the track description. That is a clear infringement scenario. It's something the Academy is going to prioritize, both from a right of publicity, but also on the implicit copyright implications of using the artist's name or using their underlying work or sound recording or lyrics to train the subsequent generative work.
Mr. Love. Mr. Love, you are muted again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, short of banning the deepfakes, there's this issue of which is a generic issue, I think, in innovation, is how do you recognize and compensate the people whose work influenced and contributed to something that sort of built on that in some different way. And that's, I think, a really important area, and it's an area that I think you could get a fresh look at when you look at AI. It's not really dealt with, I don't think, satisfactorily within the regular litigation you have over copyright infringement for non-AI works. And the other thing is, getting back to the metadata, I think that just in terms of the enforcement and making remuneration schemes work, I think you really have to do not only do a better job of what you're doing right now in metadata, but you have to have a fresh look at what would be useful in accomplishing your objectives here.
Thank you, Mr. Tardif.
Sure. Just briefly, I just want to say 100% Ms. Stinson is correct. It's absolutely wrong. It's morally despicable the way it's being done right now. These AI generated vocals, they're likely trained on vocal recordings extracted from the recordings. So, beyond name, image, likeness, right of publicity issues, there's also, copyright laws being violated. Mr. Darshan on the previous panel went through all that, so I won't do it again, but it's just being done in a bad way right now.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Foglia.
Thanks, John. And thank you again to all of our panelists today for participating in these sessions. We appreciate the insights and the perspectives that everyone shared as we examine the copyright law and policy issues raised by artificial intelligence technology. As I mentioned earlier, transcripts and video recordings of this and all of our listening sessions will be made available to the public on our website, copyright.gov/AI, about 3 weeks after each session. Although this is the last of our 2023 listening sessions, throughout this year, the Copyright Office will be providing additional opportunities for those interested in AI to share their perspectives with the office. As Register Perlmutter mentioned earlier, later this year, the office will be issuing a notice of inquiry calling for written comments on a number of questions on artificial intelligence and copyright. We also plan to host 2 webinars this summer. The first on June 28th will focus on our registration guidance. And the second, later in July, will focus on international perspectives. We look forward to hearing from you and to seeing you at future events. Thank you again for joining us and have a great evening.